right, let's get started. This work session of the Board of Education for March 18th, 2025 is called to order. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the Board and Meetings tab. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. All right, good evening, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I know Director Sullivan and Director Green will be joining us virtually tonight. Yeah, they're here. Great. Before we get started, last week we passed a resolution celebrating classified and non-representative staff week, and we recognize people who were here, who have been working for us for 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And I just want to also pass out Janice Hansen, who's our board appointed auditor, wasn't here this last week, so we delayed this. First I want to start with apology. Due to budget cuts, we couldn't get the gold medallions that are this big, and so we settled with lanyards, which are just as nice because they're actually more useful than gold. And this is for 5 years, so thank you, Janice Hansen, for being with us for 5 years and plus. Thank you for staying, and if you want to go home, feel free. Right. If you work for us for 5 years, you can go home early. Or more. Yeah. All right, next up we have the consent agenda. Right now we're going to vote on the consent agenda, and if there's board members, if there's any items you would like to pull for a separate discussion, please let us know now.
So I don't have an item to pull, and I support all the items on the consent agenda. I do have some comments when we get it on the table.
Thank you. Ms. Brash, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
No.
All right. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Director DePass moves and Director Split seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. The board will now vote on resolutions 7067 and 7073 through 7076. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Am I going to get a chance to say something?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Quick comment.
It came so quickly. So I wanted to just briefly mention something about the field trips we're going to be approving tonight. I'm supportive of them, and I'm also looking forward to later this spring having a discussion about a middle school redesign and also the capstone projects. So there was a district complaint about the field trips and what was happening at the schools while students were gone on extended trips. And there was an agreement with school communities and the superintendent at the time to do two things. One, to ensure that the students who were still at the schools for an extended period of time, that they would have their learning be uninterrupted. It would just continue on. And the second piece was that from an equity standpoint, that all of our 8th graders deserved a opportunity for a capstone trip or travel. May not be 2 weeks, but that we know our students benefit from that. And because of COVID, that got interrupted, and I'm going to be interested in finding out where we are. I know we've made some progress, but I think from the standpoint from this board, when we look at what are equitable opportunities for our students, that we keep to our promises that were made, which is we're going to try and ensure that all 8th graders get some sort of capstone trip or travel. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, we will now vote on resolution 7067 and 7073 through 7076. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Student Representative Consavi, please indicate your vote.
Yes.
Abstentions? The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0, with Student Representative Katsavi voting, unofficially voting yes. All right, next up we have the presentation discussion about graduation rates for the class of 2024 with AP and IB as well as CT pathways data. Dr. Armstrong, Superintendent Armstrong, would you like to introduce this item?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair Wong. We realize that this is last year's data, and we're in a different academic year, but this is an annual update to the board. And so I have members of my senior leadership team that will introduce themselves before they present. Thank you.
School Board. My name is Christina Howard and I am the Chief Academic Officer. I'm pleased to be here this evening to discuss the 4-year graduation rates and 5-year completion rates for the class of 2024. I believe we're loading the slides now. I am joined by Dr. John Franco, Chief of Schools, Miss Margaret Calvert, Assistant Superintendent, and Dr. Philippe Priestich, the Senior Director for 912 Academics. We look forward to hearing your questions and ask that you please hold them until the end of the presentation. Our 912 academics team will also be here in a couple of weeks to provide a more in-depth presentation on 9th grade on track, advanced coursework, and CTE. At this point, I will pass it to Dr. Franco, our Chief of Schools, and I think he's still loading the presentation.
You're really fast. Hey, Kara, I'm trying to get on here. I guess so. Okay. I'm there. I see myself. Hold on.
I only went over the agenda slide. So.
Christina was so fast. Okay. Sorry. Directors, good evening. So, in my experience as a former high school principal and now currently as the chief of schools, every graduating class has a specific character and unique set of circumstances that define their high school experience. And so just would like to acknowledge and call out this current or last year's class of 24. They are the class that ended 8th grade with the start of the pandemic. They experienced their entire 9th grade online and then finished their senior year with a work stoppage in winter ice storm. Nonetheless, they persevered and experienced admirable success. So as you can see here on this chart, the class of 2024, the 4-year graduation cohort percentage is 84%. It's also important to look at the 5-year completer numbers, which was 86.9%. The red is the 4-year and the blue is the 5-year. We're still in the mid-80s within graduation, and of course our goal overarchingly is 100% of our kids here in PPS graduate. 90% graduation rate as a district is definitely within reach. We are above pre-pandemic graduation rates. Each graduating class, if you think back to it, between 2020 and 2024, saw different graduation requirements because of the context. Given this, looking at comparisons, because we look at data all the time, between the class of 2020 and the last year's class of 2024 rates makes sense given the similarity in graduation requirements. We also here in PPS, as we do require more rigorous coursework to graduate than Oregon diploma requirements. And we continue to work with students to graduate and complete in the 5th year and beyond. I think that's important to note as well. So I do realize this slide may be kind of tough to see, but just wanted to highlight just a few things. The first is just want to call out a few numbers, because these are distinct groups that we do hone in on and pay attention to. Our American Indian, Alaskan Native, last year's percentage was 47.6. Our Black African American was 76.1%. Our Hispanic Latino group was 73.9%. And then a multiracial underserved was 79.5%. And those are the 4-year cohort graduation numbers. I also want to point out that Native students who participate in Indian education, they do graduate at significantly higher rates than our Native American students who do not participate. And it's a roughly 20% higher rate for those who participate in Native American Indian education. And I will turn this piece over, the next slide, to Assistant Superintendent Margaret Calvert.
Good evening, directors, Superintendent Armstrong and Student Representative Consavy. Part of what we've done over the number of years is look not only at graduation rates, but measures of post-secondary readiness. Students demonstrate post-secondary readiness by meeting one or more of the criteria of the 6 criteria that you see in front of you. These criteria came through our high school success plan, which high school principals along with central office staff originally built in response to Measure 98 funding that looked at high school success. We update the plan periodically. We're in the midst of a plan that I think runs from through 2026. There are specific strategies about how do we prepare students for post-secondary success. When you look at these 6 measures, just want to point out that number 2 up here about completion of with a C or better of 3 or more international baccalaureate courses. We have 2 high schools that provide IB coursework, and that's at Cleveland and at Lincoln. We have the remainder of our high schools offer either advanced placement courses or dual credit courses. And I just want to also share that dual credit courses are earned in a couple of ways. Some of them are on campus, so at a school site, and that's some of the numbers that you will see. And then with Jefferson and the Middle College, the students also take classes at PCC, so some of those data are a little harder to capture because it's captured on the transcript and not necessarily in the other ways that we measure. So as we go through some of the dual credit courses that we see in real time, like enrollment does not show up, but for all the students at Jefferson, but on the transcript they're there. So you'll see slightly 2 different measures as we go through. The other piece the other piece I just want to say is that there's the career technical pathways where we see 3 or more courses in the same pathway. And we are very aware of the graduation data around successful completion of the CTE pathways, and that it makes a dramatic difference in students' graduation and post-secondary success. And then finally, you'll see the 5th piece is around the seal of biliteracy, which I'll speak about a little bit more on the next slide. And then the 6th piece is around performance on nationally normed standardized tests. So what you'll see here is over the past 4 years, post-secondary readiness and the overall rates. In this particular slide, the darkest purple is 4 years ago and the lightest is most recent for the class of 2024. So we see that post-secondary readiness over the past 4 years has changed and has decreased somewhat over the past 4 years. We are seeing that the AP and IB attainment last year was comparable to 4 years ago in 2021. Overall, it is. How that shows up and is broken down by students by race, we're not seeing the same level of performance by race as we are by our white students and our multiracial, not historically underserved. There's some specific strategies that we're using to address this, and that I want to speak to, and then I also want to speak specifically about the seal of biliteracy. Some specific strategies that we are using to address post-secondary readiness are some examples that we have are new courses that were offered this year So, for example, at McDaniel High School, all sophomores take AP seminar. At Grant High School, all sophomores take AP Human Geography. And some students are piloting AP seminar at Franklin. What we see as a strategy when we go broadly and provide a AP or IB course for all, we're seeing an increased enrollment and increased success, and it breaks some of the predictability by race. At Cleveland, at the junior year, we're seeing that they are using not only junior language arts, but also biology for IB for all, and that is a strategy we're starting to see, again, some success from students across racial categories, and also students receiving special ed services and ELL. The other part that I would just say that when we look at courses across grade level at a grade band, at Jefferson, you have Reading and Writing 115, which is the junior language arts class, and then Senior Inquiry, which is a college level class at the senior year. So where that entry point is, we're seeing at McDaniel, they're looking at sophomore year at an AP for all course. At Cleveland and Jefferson, for example, we're seeing an IB or dual credit for all at the junior year, and then we see a lot of college level coursework at the senior year across a grade band. The key is to remove barriers, which leads to focused preparation in the freshman and sophomore year, so that students can not only access college level coursework and advanced coursework, but then find success. These measures are for students that have C or higher in the courses. So in those realms, we are also doing things about how students enter high school, and then how are we providing critical supports so we can address their gaps, learning gaps that may be coming out of the pandemic, so that we can accelerate learning, change trajectories, and have students be prepared to access and complete successfully college level coursework. I want to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Philippe Stitch.
Thank you. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing across the 9-12 spectrum to make sure that our students are ready for graduation and beyond. So in the next slide, you can see a visual that represents our college, our post-secondary readiness continuum. We'll talk more about this in April, where we'll dig even deeper into 9th grade success, CT, and AP, but we just wanted to offer a brief overview this evening. So as you can see, post-secondary readiness begins with our 8th to 9th grade transition, which includes our 8th grade success teams, counselors and teachers collaborating with each other, as well as leap into 9th grade, which is our summer program. In 9th grade, all of our students are assigned to a community, which means that for the most part, students share the same group of core teachers. Our 9th grade success teams meet regularly to collaborate, to review student data, to provide interventions, and to build relationships. Our high school students, especially 9th and 10th grade, are expected to receive high quality instruction through the adopted curricula, and to be provided with the support they need to be successful for advanced coursework, starting for the most part in 11th grade. All of our high schools offer CTE and advanced courses, as we see these as essential components of the high school experience. Throughout high school, students also receive career exploration and post-secondary advising, as well as activities connected to their post-secondary plans. Next slide. So here you can see information about the college enrollment trends for our students. This data comes from the National Clearinghouse. There is a lag, so the numbers that you're looking at for 23, 24 are not entirely accurate. They will go up by a few percentage points. As you can see, there was a noticeable dip for the class of 2020, perhaps not surprisingly. Since then, enrollment rates have begun to rebound. And while the overall college enrollment rate has not reached the pre-pandemic levels, We are seeing some promising results for the four-year college going great, both for overall students and especially for our historically underserved students. So as I mentioned before, we'll come back in April to provide more information about CTE, AP, as well as ninth grade success. But we're also open to answering questions this evening if you have any.
Great, thank you. Well, about questions?
I have a question. Do we have an idea, it's around the numbers of students that are homeless and how that might impact the graduation rates? Because I believe there's additional supports for homeless students, but do we know what the impact of that universe of students is on the graduation rate?
We have, the state, as part of the reporting process, does include a graduation rate for homelessness. I don't have it in front of me, but we certainly can get that for you.
I had another question about Jefferson students. Do we know out of the census there, the population, how many are actually taking advantage of the dual credit, and then how many African American students are taking advantage of the dual enrollment opportunity?
So we can,
if you don't have that, I would take that information later as well.
I think we can speak in general terms, and I'm happy to get you specifics. So one of the pieces that happens for Jefferson in particular is that there are dual credit courses that happen at the junior year. And language arts, it's reading and writing 115, that is a dual credit course that is taught on campus with PCC. It's aligned to PCC curricula. And then in the senior year, all students take PSU Senior Inquiry, which is then with PSU, which includes language arts and social studies. So at that broad space of that is all students. So this is part of the middle college. It's not a program, it's a school, it's the entire school. So everybody's expected to take advantage of the classes. What is less clear in the data that we're showing and sort of a little harder to track are the pieces around when students are taking classes at PCC. Right, so that's what's unique about the setup at Jefferson is that you have students taking dual credit on the Jefferson side of the street, but then also walking across and taking classes at PCC. And those get transcripted. They're not in our data system in the same way, so it's lagging for us to gather that information. But we certainly can get you some more details about the percentage of students that are taking advantage of and completing the middle college diploma, which ties to a minimum of 12 college credits prior to graduation.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I was really curious. I didn't realize that that classes were offered on both sides of the street. So thank you for clarifying that.
I kind of want to dig in on funding for some of the programs that you think have been really helpful. Particularly, I've been thinking a lot about Measure 98, which I have this assumption has been really helpful in helping us to have both supports towards increased graduation rates and CTE. So I'm just curious what impact you think Measure 98 has had on these programs, and then I might ask some follow-ups related to other funding streams and if they have a role as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I would say Measure 98 has had a tremendous impact. Our ninth grade communities are funded in large part or exclusively by Measure 98. Our college coordinators who are working with a particular focus in supporting our historically underserved students are funded through Measure 98, and we attribute some of the increases in four-year college enrollment rates to the work that they and their teams are doing. So Measure 98 has been a tremendous success, and there are lots of different iterations and levels of funding that Measure 98 provides.
In follow-up, I'm just curious if there's funding that comes from the Student Success Act, because I know they have some sort of dedicated funding that goes to different things. I don't know if it also goes to supporting increased graduation rates or not. And then also if there's federal dollars or grant dollars that particularly support this work.
I mean,
I'm just trying to learn. Sorry, I'm not trying to.
Yeah, Measure 98 focuses exclusively on high schools and does include 8th grade. Our student attendance coaches are funded through Measure 98. Measure 98 has supported CT expansion. It has certainly supported dropout prevention and increased access and success in advanced coursework. With regards to SIA,
Are you talking, Director Split, specifically like student investment account, SIA?
The Student Success Act, I think it's the student, I think the SIA is the account. in that,
Yeah. So there are specific pieces, maybe not necessarily predicated to high school, but more so on the lower levels in reference to SIA. Like if you think about academic interventionists and instructional coaches, like those are some big ticket items that definitely lead up to as we think about high school graduation and post-secondary readiness.
I think the other piece that is new to high schools in the last couple of years is Title I funding. And so we've had Roosevelt has become a Title I high school, for example, and Alliance High School. So those resources allow focused support for students and connections to school in order to help support students get connected to high school and then also complete.
I had one other line of questioning, if that's okay, but if you'd rather me not, it's fine. Okay. The other question I had was, I know that that we have a fairly high level of opting out that happens for the OSAS testing, and at the high school level in particular. And I was just curious if you think that creates any issues with being able to track where students are, or if you feel like there are other mechanisms that you have that can kind of capture that help you find those students that need the extra support, especially ones that choose to opt out, so you don't have that particular data point. So what other ways are you getting there?
Do you want to go? Sorry.
I can start and then Margaret can chime in. I would say, yes, I think that is, I would say it's not specific to PPS. I think high schools in general struggle with OSAS participation. And when you don't have that level of kind of norm national assessment, that is a data point that we don't have. And so, things that obviously like for example, 9th grade on track is a big piece that we look at. Also the infusion moving forward of curriculum embedded common assessments will be a leading indicator, right, of how we are doing progress-wise. And I'd also say too, we just shared kind of some of the post-secondary pieces in terms of students who graduate enrolling in 2- and 4-year universities. I think that's an important piece as well. And then also, like our kids take the SAT, right? I would say pretty consistently, because that's just something that we offer. Looking more in depth about how our students are doing on that particular assessment is going to be a big data point for us moving forward as well. And we look at it as well, but I think if we don't get the OSAS participation moving forward, that's going to be a big piece.
Student Representative Katsavi?
Yeah, I think my question is kind of regarding around how many high schools participate in like the partnership with PSU with like the senior inquiry. Do you have the exact amount of high schools that participate?
Go ahead.
3. So Jefferson, Roosevelt, and McDaniel all have the senior inquiry class, which is a partnership with PSU that allows students to earn, I think, up to 16 college credits.
And then my next thing, I know we have like CT, it's a really big thing for our high schools. I've heard from lots of middle school students that they really want to participate in like lots of CT programs our high schools have. So definitely strongly encourage if there's ways we can kind of include our middle schoolers or other middle schools we have in PBS and CT programs. I think that'd be really helpful for them.
Absolutely, we absolutely agree, and we want our young people to begin thinking about some possible CT pathways as soon as possible. So those conversations are definitely underway. And also just want to reiterate what Dr. Franco said about the value and the importance of having a coherent curriculum is that it does provide opportunities for common assessments to be used as a way of assessing and monitoring early and regularly how our young people are doing academically, as opposed to waiting until junior year to figure out who is on track or who isn't on track. And so we're building systems that will allow us centrally, but also locally at the school level, at the PLC level, at the ninth grade success team level, for teachers to actively reflect on how students are doing with regards to mastering these key essential skills.
Thank you. I just have a hopefully quick question. On page 10 of the presentation, it looks like there's a trend on both sides that there's a decline in 2-year enrollment in colleges and an increase in 4-year enrollment in college. I was wondering if you could expand on that. Like, what does that mean? Or if we know yet.
I mean, what it means is that more of our students are choosing to go to 4-year universities rather than 2-year programs. Part of that is exciting because we know that the completion rate of students who are attending 4-year universities is higher than for students who are attending 2-year schools. The likelihood of them earning a degree is much higher. You're probably wondering about why that's happening, and that's a good question. What we can do is look at some of our exit surveys to try to glean a little bit about our students' decision making. What I'm taking away from this is that more of our young people have the confidence to embark on a 4-year post-secondary journey, which is exciting, and I think a testament to the work that our counselors and college coordinators and teachers are doing to prepare our graduates for that.
Great, thank you. Director Brim Edwards, you have a question?
Of course I have questions. Margaret would be disappointed if I didn't. So I'm glad to see that over the last 8 years, the reach of what students have access to both college and college prep classes, but also CTE classes has expanded. I'm going to also note that I'm disappointed that PPS is proposing no longer supporting all of our high schools with the position for a career coordinator, because I think one of the strengths in the program is if you looked at this data 15 years ago when I was very active in this issue, it was very uneven about what students had access to college prep classes. There were very few CTE classes with the exception of Benson. There weren't any clear career coordinators, and PPS made a consistent push to all high schools having both college prep and CTE and career coordinators. So I'm hoping in the budget process we don't back away from that. And I've got this is a data request I made before the meeting, but I'm going to ask that we get it afterwards since we couldn't have it at this meeting, but because I think it'll provide the board with I think more relevant data for us to dive into in terms of what strategies we should be funding and where, if we need to change strategies or accelerate them, but getting the additional data by high school, and then the actual number of students who are in each of we just have percentages, and sometimes that doesn't tell us a lot. But for an example, the reason why I want to know for the high school, so say we have a high school like Cleveland that's doing IB for all, is that, are we getting then most high school students getting that C or better in what would be a college prep class? And we can't really see that, and so having aggregated data instead tells us that overall, the numbers are changing, but they don't tell us that's the strategy that we should have at every high school, maybe AP for all or IB for all, whatever the version of it. It sounds like we have something, but is that actually effective in increasing students' exposure? So I hope we can get that data. And then I had a question about our measurement, because just comparing it to the past. In my understanding, my recollection is in the past we used to be measuring whether, for example, in IB you got a 5 or better. I'm not going to get mixed up between IB and AP, but a certain standard. And it seems like now you're saying the standard is C or better, and so are we comparing apples to oranges? Because they're different standards. So for example, the standard used to be like most public universities would accept an AP, if you took the test, the AP test of this level, or an IB test if you got this number. And now it seems like what I thought I heard it say is we're measuring it by whether you got a C in the class or better, and we've switched off of that other measure.
So I think, two things. I appreciate the question. I think that as we've looked at, we want to provide access and then also success. Like, I think that's what you're driving at, and I agree wholeheartedly. Like, saying we're going to enroll students in a class is one thing, saying that they're successfully completing and have an opportunity to get college, the potential to get college credit is a different thing. One of the things that happened as we expanded dual credit opportunities was that we wanted to be able to say, you know, can we compare what this looks like? So it's not quite there. I hear what you're saying. And the dual credit that happens is by a grade and a completion of the course. So we kind of tried to level that so we could compare across. Are we seeing the same level of academic success within the courses? The additional lever that you're asking is what percentage of our students are taking the IB or AP test. And we can certainly provide you with that information as well. It is not 100% of the students. So I think that's to your point as well, is that a subset of students actually take the test. We're trying to get to, encourage that. The other piece that I would say is that when we're looking at, dual credit versus AP or IB, when you're talking about what does it mean to earn college credit, when you're in a dual credit class, it's performance over time, and AP and IB is performance on a specific date, right? It is on a test. And so I think that part of what we're working towards is, one, can we compare across these three measures? And then two, can we refine? So we certainly can come back and say, of these students, how many received a 3 on an AP or a 5 on an IB, for example.
Isn't that what we did last year? So are we looking at different data sets
No,
here?
it's the same.
So you've normed it so that's all the C or better?
Yes.
Even though we used to do
They're two slightly different things. One question is how many of our students are earning high school credit in advanced courses? And then the second question is how many of them are going on to earn college credit by successfully passing AP exam with a 3, 4, or 5. I think the measure for the board reporting purposes has always been C or better in these courses. But on the agenda for April, we will dig into the AP data. And I'll just tell you that it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope we do both things, as I know having students being exposed to college level courses in and of itself helps them prepare for college level courses. And for many of our students, the ability in a free public high school to earn potentially a whole year of college credit by taking the exams and passing them is huge. So for me, it's like not either or, but like, do we have both of those? Because that is a huge gift that we can give to our students if they are earning even 3 college credits.
Are you gonna pivot away? Because I have a follow-up, just tiny one on
Yeah,
what you're
go
asking
ahead.
about. I'm just
I was
curious
gonna breathe,
if
so-
we offer, yeah, breathe. I was curious if we offer financial assistance for AP tests or IB tests for kids that need it, so
We
that they
do.
can take them. Okay, thank you.
I was just gonna, at some point, you said you were gonna say something about biliteracy.
Yes,
The seal of
this-
biliteracy,
yes.
which used to be one of the standards, but I don't, did you say something or did I miss it?
It is, I did not say it. Thank you for bringing it back. So one of the pieces that we notice is that of the measures, the seal of biliteracy has dropped for us over the last few years. And so we went back through to say what is driving that. And so one of the things that that happened is that starting with the spring of 2023, so not this last graduating class, but the previous one, students had to demonstrate proficiency in English as well as their first language. And that what's challenging is that we don't have the same number of ways of measuring English proficiency that we do for other languages, like so the STAMP test or using all the other pieces. So you have to create portfolios to demonstrate it in both languages, and that has been a challenge for us to do over time. So we're working to build that back up, but there was a change in what was required by ODE to demonstrate a seal of biliteracy, and the challenge is not in the first language; it's actually in English. And what are the standards that we have to do, and what do we have at our disposal to actually demonstrate that? So we're working to buttress that.
But they can still earn it. We just aren't measuring it or not including it in this report.
No, it is actually, it's in the report, it's in the appendices. It's the seal,
Okay.
so it is, we consolidated the post-secondary readiness in the slide deck itself, but it's included in the appendices as one of the slides. So I just wanted to note that you see this decrease or in 2023, and that part of it, it's actually that what the reporting requirements changed, and we're still adjusting to those changes in the reporting requirements.
I just hate to lose it because it was a way in which a home language became an asset for
Absolutely.
students.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Director Sullivan? Do you have any questions?
Trying to get back here. No, a lot of good questions asked, especially that biliteracy one. It seems like you should be able to find a test like people must get tested for English all over in other countries.
I think the challenge is what is the 4 areas. So it's the listening. From what has been shared with me is that what's hardest is to get a listening test that is demonstrated. So you have to demonstrate it in reading, writing, speaking, and listening in order to have the biliteracy. And so again, we're adjusting to making sure that we can do it through portfolio work, and there are mechanisms to do it. We're building those mechanisms out in order to, because to all of your point, the goal is to demonstrate and value multiple languages and to see that it's an asset for students.
Yeah, and I also like what you, I forget which one of you said, but you want to provide access and success. And so I think I've heard you before say you do a lot of counseling on people who are taking AP courses to make sure they're going to be successful. Is that true?
Absolutely, and just to build on an earlier question about how Measure 98 is useful in this regard, one thing that we did last year is to add a position in all of our high schools called Learning Acceleration Specialist. This is building on some of the work that was happening in K-8 space. And a Learning Acceleration Specialists work to provide individual student support to encourage students to take advanced courses. They also work with teachers around professional development, and they work with counselors as well. So they are liaison, they are supporting students, and they are making sure that our students are not just recruited into advanced courses, but also have the support that they need to be successful in those spaces. So absolutely, access and success.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hollins?
None.
I just have a kind of follow-up question with the seal biliteracy issue. The guess is that the number of students and their abilities hasn't really dropped over the years as the testing protocol issue, right? Because I mean, it's kind of concerning because we dropped from like 1/5 of our students getting it to like 1/10, and that's kind of a big drop. So if this obviously, you know, from what you said, it's an ODE change in rules. Is there something that the board or policy could also help that along? This doesn't have to be answered now, but something to kind of throw out there. Is there something that the board or policy could help along to kind of get this? Because we would like to recognize that bilingualism is an asset. So, thank you. Any further questions? I want to thank you all for your hard work. This great presentation, a lot of good data, and I'm sure we'll be chewing on this for quite a bit.
Thank you.
See you next month.
All right. Next up, we have an update on our high school modernization projects. I guess I'll hand this over to Superintendent Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. As you know, the team's been working over the past 2 weeks to prepare this update that was passed through a resolution. So thank you for that. Tonight we have Chief Young, Chief Operating Officer, who will introduce his co-presenter and any other presenter he has. And I will turn it over to Chief Young. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, directors. We're here tonight, as requested, to provide an update on the high school modernization projects. Specifically, we want to highlight how the project designs are being updated to reflect the direction that is in the board's cost reduction framework, including targeting an approximate building area of 295,000 square feet. So tonight, I know we don't have a lot of time, so we have three short presentations from our project teams, and we welcome feedback from the board on whether what you see tonight, if that is looking like that is representative of what the direction is that was provided by the board in the framework, or if we need to make any adjustments as we go along. And then also, as requested, we will be back with more updates and additional detail at the April 8th and April 22nd meetings. And if there isn't any initial questions, I will scoot out of the way and we'll let the first team come up and begin their presentation.
We're going to start with the Jefferson team.
Hello, board members, superintendent. My name is Steve Efros. I'm a senior project manager. Can you guys hear me? A little closer. Senior project manager on the Jefferson modernization project. I think we have Keisha Locklear, we should, online. And then we have Natalie Muchler, our Bora project manager on the Jefferson project. Quick intro as well. Obviously, you're going to hear from all three projects. I think we have a little bit more detail in the first one because we've been kind of going at this a little longer. But hopefully some of that background, including kind of the ed spec information, will help kind of level set for all three projects. So I'd like to now hand it off to Natalie.
Okay. So today we're going to go over the site constraints and cost reduction opportunities specific to Jefferson High School. The PPS Comprehensive Education Specifications Alignment, the Teen Parent Center, the commitment to PPS climate policy, the all-electric infrastructure, alternatives to LEED Gold certification, and then additional options trade-offs under consideration, kind of in alignment with the board's framework. For Jefferson, the site constraints are pretty tight. We have an existing building location to the south of our site. We have a cross-block requirements through zoning. To connect the two north-south streets on our site that flank our site on Kirby and Commercial. We have demolition and construction access requirements because of the existing school. And then we have a smaller building footprint, which creates a challenge to fit all of our program elements, such as the theater, the main gym, the commons, the health center, the teen parent center, and the SPED classrooms, which all want to be on that ground floor. To the right on our screen, we're looking at the footprint of Jefferson, which is about 145,000 square feet, compared to Cleveland, which is about 176,000 square feet, and then IW Walls at 206. So we have a little bit of a tighter site. Some of the site scope that is not in service to student athletes, athletic teams, and is understudied to be removed, reduced from the project. We're studying the potential removal and reduction of the new parking area south of Alberta because it doesn't necessarily aid in student athletes and athletic teams. We're looking at a potential reduction of landscape improvements to the Kirby Grove, which is the red area to the north of the site on the site plan. That's between the existing parking lot and the site because it's not for athletes. And then we're also looking at the TPC, which we had as a separate site building, but we'll be moving into the school instead to save cost. This is looking at kind of how we're handling program. So this is the PPS Comprehensive Education Specifications Alignment. We have an ed spec minimum building that would require 284,000 square feet at the end of 50% DD, which was a phase that we ended in December. We had an ed spec plus building with 311,000 gross square feet. And then we are working on the program through the Board of Education requested framework. And we are, this says 301, but we've been working on this and we're now at 295, 716 for the gross square footage. And that's a reduction of 15,423. And then the chart to the right kind of showcases how that is differentiated across the program elements. So helps to align with the ed spec minimum. As part of that, we're also looking at potentially adjusting certain programs, such as the dedicated community partner spaces, including the SEI coordinator offices. Partner offices are part of the ed spec and will remain. And then Indian education. 2 athletic team rooms, but 3 would remain. Student mediation office, student government office, library classroom, and school archive room. The areas that will be potentially reduced would be the theater. We were showing 1,000 seats at the 50% DD level, but we'll be reducing 200 to 500 seats per ed spec. Dance studios would be reduced by 700 square feet each, in alignment with theater stage size. That's 500 square feet larger than what JHS has now. General use locker room count would be reduced to 1,000 lockers from 1,700, and then the choir room would be reduced by 200 square feet to align with ed spec. In terms of the Teen Parent Center, the Board of Education framework guidelines state that the project would include a Teen Parent Center if there was a demonstrated need for the school. The team is working with school and district leaders and exploring opportunities and needs. For the health center, we're going to maintain the 50% TD size of 1750 and keep that space within the main building. And then commitment to PPS climate policy, all electric infrastructure. We're going to maintain that commitment for the school and are only studying building options that maintain that standard. Alternatives to LEED Gold certification. The project will seek sustainable solutions that are practical, maintainable, and cost-effective, and additional options, trade-offs to save costs or square footage. The design team is studying VAV, mechanical system solutions, structural options, and building material selections. In terms of next steps, we'll be looking at the building size and the ed specs. We are test fitting the proposed space program into a proposed building footprint that fits within our site. And then the Jefferson administration team will be test fitting it to its master schedule with proposed classrooms to the new space program. And then in terms of construction costs, the design team will be exploring alternative mechanical and structural system options. And RLB, who is our third-party cost estimator, is developing a cost model based on updated site plan and space program.
So if there are any questions, certainly for any of those items, we can go back to those topics to review it in a little more detail.
I just have one quick question, and this actually applies to all the other projects as well. But one thing I'm a little concerned about is kind of the LEED Gold standard, because I guess I have a question about that, because I think if I understand correctly, the LEED Gold standard also is indoor air quality, and I guess my concern is if, reducing LEED Gold standard, could that mean possibly, like, for example, materials with higher VOCs, formaldehyde or other off-gassing, benzene and things like that. Yeah, I guess that would be my concern. I don't know if, again, I don't know enough about LEED Gold certified to make a statement, but I'm just curious if you could provide some background with that in terms of indoor air quality.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's actually exactly what we've been discussing internally with our planning and ed spec, and kind of connecting kind of to the instructional side as well as with maintenance, because indoor air quality is critical, but there's also a lot of measures that actually kind of provide additional longevity, and then obviously there's the whole energy efficiency side of things. So in some cases, our standards actually define a lot of requirements like energy efficiency in particular. In other areas, LEED actually provides a really helpful framework. I think, like you're saying, in areas that we haven't dialed in the standards as much, or we have it's a little more difficult to kind of manage or track them. So to some degree, I think we're not looking necessarily at wholesale abandoning of LEED as a system, but we're looking in particular at the certification process. Does that sort of add some additional cost? Well, we know it does to some degree, but is there a way that we can kind of more flexibly use sort of the LEED system potentially? But I think we see a lot of value. I think that's kind of where we've landed. We've actually compared it to other kind of sustainability systems, and I think the familiarity in-house with our design and engineering teams is very helpful, certainly. So I think we're tending to move in that direction. It's just a question of how we monitor and how we kind of track it.
One of the things we're trying to analyze with LEED Gold is what are the LEED Gold credits that we would be pursuing just to try to get LEED Gold certification. And so the indoor air quality is a credit that we could, or the concepts in that credit, we can apply them to the project by making sure that we include them in the drawings and specs for the contractor during construction, and we would track it just the same as we would if we were actually going to get LEED certification in the end. So our architects and engineers and contractors are very used to seeing those requirements around LEED certification, and we can very easily incorporate that into the specifications for the project around low VOC materials and indoor air quality tracking and things like that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Questions?
Yeah, I appreciate your creativity around, building to LEED standards without pursuing a certification, because we know that certification, there is a cost to it. And I'm not sure if, there's a return on investment, and we're looking to save costs wherever we can. So if we could build, all electric, which is in the plan, and to the standard without seeking out the certification, I think that would save us some money. And I think with LEED also, aren't there, indoor air quality is one of the elements, but there are multiple elements that you can sort of trade, and you can make trade-offs in certain areas and not in others. I had a couple questions. One, let's see, looking, my computer went dark. On the slide that shows the red, blue, green comparison of the ed specs to what's in the drawings currently, there were two areas where the ed specs are more robust. Those are in the general ed, where it looks like the ed specs call for when you're comparing the program, 50,000 versus what's in the plan now for general ed. My comment is that in general ed and in education support, the spec is higher than, and I just question at Jefferson why we would choose those two areas to not build the ed spec to. That's just one question. The other one is about the Teen Parent Center. I thought we'd had some discussion about whether or not, or assessing whether there was a need for a teen center, especially because, we're hearing about, fertility rates dropping, and teen parent rates have been dropping for many years. And so I thought that that was one area that we had discussed looking at and assessing it on a building by building level. And those are my questions. Thank you.
I'm actually going to bring up our program specialist, Amber, who's in the audience, to kind of answer your question about general ed versus education support.
Yeah, thank you. I really, that, of all of the, on that slide, the science, the ed spec is met, performing arts, the ed spec is exceeded, but in general ed and education support, which are what we know are needed at Jefferson, are both less than the spec. So
Yes.
that's, my question is about why would that be?
So Jefferson specifically has a very robust dance program that is not accounted for in the ed spec. And so to retain the spirit and the functionality of that program, needing to offset some of that area with some general education or some education support rather than just adding, if that makes sense. So to bring the total program down to the 295, needing to find ways to reallocate areas to mostly accommodate dance.
Okay, I went to Jefferson, so I know very well about the dance program.
Yeah.
It's a great program, and in fact, it was funded by about $300,000 a year in the late '70s when I was going by the National NEA. Okay, so that describes. Then there's the reduction of the capacity of the seats for the theater. Does that also? How does that tie into having this robust dance program, but not enough seats for the parents to come and watch their children dance?
My understanding is currently
Jefferson does rent the Newmark Theater for large dance performances each year. And our previous design did have a 1,000-seat theater to accommodate those larger performances at the school. I think with these reductions and kind of the assignment we've been tasked with, reducing down to 295 and aligning with EdSpec, that was one of the elements that did get reduced back down to EdSpec. So we're still exploring opportunities to, I think, design a theater that can flex, like if it is it 500 seats, could it flex up to a little bit more without increasing the area and the footprint? And I think it'll also come down to some of the cost studies that we're working with our RLB estimator with, of what that final size and seat capacity of the theater can be. But regardless of a 1,000-seat or a 500-seat, that stage and theater can absolutely be designed to optimize dance performances.
Excellent. And is our 500 seats on par with our newly modernized
Yes.
Franklin and Grant? Okay, thank you.
Yes, 500 seats are for new construction, modernized high schools. I think there are some renovated high schools that might have slightly larger capacities, but for new builds like Jefferson, it would be a 500-seat for EdSpec.
Can we say what that number
Thank you.
is? What is the, sorry, thank you for that question. Sorry to just jump in. What is the theater number for Grant, Lincoln? Do you have those comparative?
Lincoln is a 500-seat theater. I don't know off the top of my head what Grant or some of the other schools were. I worked on Lincoln, so I know that well.
Yeah, but we can get those numbers. In fact, I think we have a cross-check kind of comparison of all the schools built to date.
Thank you. Director Sullivan?
Oh, I wanted to address
Yes,
the,
what is, Jeff's seating capacity now? Is it 500?
the current theater does exceed 500 seats at Jefferson now. I
Okay.
believe there's an upper balcony that's underutilized, but the lower level is utilized more, and it does exceed that 500 seats currently. So it would be different.
Okay. And looking at that same chart that Michelle was looking at, it's general ed, administration and counseling, education support are lower on EdSpec, lower than EdSpecs. Those are mostly rooms, right? Like classrooms?
Correct. So for the general education, it would be offsetting some general education classrooms to support more robust CTE, which you're also seeing reflected there. And then the reduction in building support is, for the most part, a handful of teacher planning spaces that get offset to accommodate some of the other specialized programming at Jeff as well.
Okay, but we have to be sure the teachers have room.
Yes. Just for comparison, our previous design at 50% DD in December had 0 teacher planning spaces. So with this reorganization, we've actually re-implemented 5 of the 10 EdSpec teacher planning spaces to better align and accommodate for the sharing of classrooms at a full capacity. So we're improving.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But were you going to respond to something?
The TPC question, the Teen Parent Center question that you had, Michelle. Sorry, Director DePass. We are working internally across all 3 projects to work with the staff who are responsible for the Teen Parent program to define what demonstrated need means, and to analyze the that demonstrated need at each site to make the determination. So we don't know tonight whether any of these 3 buildings are going to meet that definition yet or not, because we haven't established it.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Yep.
All right, students?
So,
Go ahead.
I
Sorry,
actually have
I
some
forgot.
questions, because I saw you trying to
Yeah,
jump
thank
in.
you. My mistake. Go ahead.
So, I appreciate the questions that have been asked before, because it answers some of mine. I have sort of 2 sets of questions, some specific to Jefferson, and then some that are kind of across projects. So I'll ask it now during Jefferson, and I won't ask it later, but they kind of apply to all. And I'll start with that one. There's a couple places in here that it says additional options, trade-offs, and the design team is studying things like the VAV, mechanical system solutions, structural options, building materials selections, and then there's also some other items that could be potential cost reductions. And I'm wondering, is there like a PPS work group that's sort of sharing across the school rebuild so that each school's not having to do their own sort of investigation and exploring of like what are high quality, lower cost materials or systems. So I'm just that's a general system, more of like how are we supporting the individual projects? And then maybe this is a question for you, Stormy.
Yeah, sure. We are, the three modernization projects throughout, ever since November when we started looking at these cost reduction studies, we've been working extremely closely together, along with our, colleagues on the FAM side. So the ones who wrote the ed specs and understand them really well, and all of our lessons learned, as well as our facility standards, which really addresses more of the materials and the quality of our systems, I guess, building systems. So we are, you know, they're not each going back and forth just within their own project silo to talk about, you know, building skin quality. We're talking about it as a group all together constantly, pretty much. I'd say 3 times a week, at least.
I'm glad to hear that. So shared learning or collaborative knowledge is always better. Let's see, Director DePass asked my questions about the ed spec space. On slide 4, this is more the outside space, both PE and sports. It looks like there's a studying of making some reductions, but that they look to be more sort of auxiliary items versus like a reduction in sort of field space or anything like that. So reduction in landscape improvements, changing the parking lot. So those are things that wouldn't reduce because of course Jefferson's the school of champions. We don't want to be reducing that outdoor space, right?
That's correct, yeah. No,
So-
that's exactly.
So the reductions are being made are more sort of,
Ancillary.
ancillary.
Yeah.
That's the word. Okay, so I just want to confirm that, and then on the just a slightly different variation of the sustainability question, I didn't see in any of the across the 3 high schools any mention of the sort of mass timber versus concrete and steel versus concrete and steel, and that seemed in at least the Cornerstone report that was a savings place. And I know now with tariffs on steel, maybe it's not a savings place, but it was silent on it, so I'm just curious about that particular piece.
We are studying it. We don't have the cost data right now. That one is, because it's not in the ed spec, you know, it's harder to show on a slide. The only information that we will really have about it is related to the cost. And so we're not there yet with the actual cost savings associated with any of the changes to the space program either.
Well, it looks like Director DePass has her hand raised.
I was going to say there is mention in your presentation about embodied carbon, though, and so we might look at the costs as one indicator, and we might look at the impact of embodied carbon on the other. So it might be nice to have a nice look at what each of those scenarios, whether it's, you know, mass timber or steel concrete, what the environmental impact and what the financial impact.
Great. And this is one last piece, and again, this isn't Jefferson specific, more district specific, and so I want to be really clear, this isn't Jefferson specific, because I know you got a set of instructions to reduce the square footage, but the school board did receive late this evening, or right before the board meeting, a letter from Tamara Brown, who's the interim Indian Parent Committee chair, about them being moved out of Jefferson, and sort of once again them not having a permanent home. And they asked me to read this, but they asked somebody to read it at the meeting, but instead of reading it, I'm going to ask that we just post it as public comment, if that's okay. It's outlines just their sort of continuing to be itinerant around the district and not having a permanent home. And again, this isn't Jefferson specific. I want to just be clear about that. This is really a district responsibility for them to have a home. So I'm just going to ask to have it, if that's okay, to have it just posted with as public comment to our board meeting. Thank you.
Representative Kasabi?
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the potential reductions for the performing arts. I believe we heard very clearly from our students their support for those spaces and why they feel like they need it. So I really hope their voices are really a part of this decision making. And then on page 6, just for clarity, are the spaces listed there, are they being reduced or completely removed? I was just wondering if you could provide more, or provide me a better understanding on what's happening with those spaces.
Yeah, I think as we're working through some of the space programs and designs, we're looking at adjusting some of these areas. So while they may not have dedicated space, there may be other flexible spaces that they could be accommodated by, specifically SEI and Indian education. However, the athletic team room, student mediation, student government office, library classroom, and student archive room are currently being considered to be removed.
I just want to clarify too that these updates that we're providing you tonight are a pretty, they're kind of a blunt response to the framework, right? So these aren't anything that, from our standpoint, we consider as decided. These are the framework that we've been given. This is a response to the framework. And so these are the kinds of questions that we'll need guidance from you all to confirm these changes or to make the decision to keep including them.
Go first.
Once we have the cost data to go with it.
Director Hollins?
Yes, thank you. And this is, I think, I don't know who just spoke, but I think this is one of the reasons why getting reductions and recommendations from our OSM department was so important, because now it seems like they're throwing it back on us as far as, well, this is the framework you gave us, when it was repeatedly asked, well, what recommendations do you guys have for reductions before we start coming in? And this is, and so I want to make sure that we're clear. These are based on reductions that we said, but we asked multiple times, what recommendations does the OSM have for these reductions to for the school buildings? And when I say that, I'm saying that as OSM department is the experts. They're the ones who have done 7 other schools. We're not experts. We haven't built multi-million-dollar buildings. So I hope that this continues to be a collaborative effort in how we reduce these costs, and not just saying, oh, well, this is the board gave us and this is what we're coming back. I'm hoping you also come back with, these are our recommendations as well.
Actually, I'm a little bit confused because the instructions were to design within the framework, and I didn't get a sense that it was coming back as a cost. It was like, this is doable. We can still build high quality high schools that meet the specifications that we've set in a cost effective way. So that's, to me, that's, from a level setting, I don't see it coming back of like us being like, well, we like this piece, but we don't like that. It's like, here's the framework. We all like very much committed to the ed specs. We think that every school community deserves to have that. And we know that we also need to reduce the cost in order to pass the bond. I just personally just want, it's hard work, and I appreciate it happening, but I don't see this coming back that we're going to be voting on individual items. That's not what the resolution said, and frankly, that would delay all of our school projects. So I see this as, a continued getting input and keeping in mind our end goal, which is the high quality high schools that is similar to and equitable to what the other high schools got, and we're going to have reduced costs, because we need that, because otherwise there are no high schools if we don't pass the bond.
I have a comment. So Jefferson isn't on this bond. The Jefferson was on the 2020 bond, and it passed overwhelmingly, obviously. I also personally appreciate the opportunity to kind of have a conversation about this, because the buildings ultimately will reflect the values of our community. We're here wearing some hats of representing the community. I also want to just provide some historical context because I've been around a long time, and I attended Jefferson. I've lived in the Jefferson catchment area whenever I've been in Portland. And Jefferson has been disinvested in for decades and decades, and the outcomes prove it. And so just as a note to self, I'm talking to myself too, and all of us up here and all of us out here, I want to just let you know how important it is to invest back in this community. To make the high quality spaces, not to shortchange the general ed opportunities, to really lean into what it means to make decisions differently than we've been making for about 40 years, maybe 50 or longer. And so, yes, we want a high quality building that can serve the community that lives in and around the catchment area. And this has already been approved by voters. So it's just a matter of, I appreciate the conversation because it's a chance to express our values around climate and environment and education spaces and what it looks like to have reduced this and extra that. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And thanks for putting your time into this.
Thank you.
I have a very strong desire to let that be the last word, but I did just want to thank you all so much because I really feel like what you did was exactly what we asked you to do. And it might not feel easy or feel really good, but that is what we asked you to do, to reduce the footprint, to make them, these 3 schools that haven't been built yet more in line size-wise with Lincoln, and then figuring out how to make that work. And so I just want to say thank you, and I'm really excited to hear from community about what they think about this as we go forward. And that's it. You did exactly what we asked you to do. Thanks.
I just want to respond with that. And this is probably before Director Split's time, but we had asked them to do something before differently, and they did not do that. And so when we gave them the framework, now they're coming back to doing based on that. But we had actually asked the OSM department to come up with recommendations that will show a reduce in pricing, or reduce in the cost of this before we actually gave them the framework. So I just want to make sure we're very clear on that. This ain't something that, we told them what to do and they're just coming back to doing them. This is after we had asked them to do something. They did not do that. And then we gave them framework and then they're coming back under that mantra.
Thank you, Director Hollins. With that, I want to just thank you and thanks for all this hard work and this great report. So thank you very much.
The next update is for the Wells High School project.
Hello, I'm Donna Bizzaio. I'm with PPS OSM. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the Ida B. Wells High School project. With me I have Bora represented.
I'm Becca Cavell, Project Manager with the Bora team for Ida B. Wells. Should we get going? Okay. Thank you for having us here. So this is our outline, similar to the Jefferson project. We'll talk about site opportunities and constraints as requested, and we will give you an update on the site and building organization and the responses to the board's framework. You will find some similarities between what we're saying and what the Jefferson team said, and we will also give you some next steps for this project. So the Ida B. Wells site is very different to the Jefferson site. We do have a lot more space, but we have some very significant constraints which are worth talking about, including a 60-foot grade change from the east to the west. So that's about 4 tall stories, just to give you a sense of how much grade change that is across this site. And that does drive some of the site organization. And the next slide shows some of the existing components on that site, including actually shaded on the west side of the site, the Riki Elementary School. North of that, we have some existing fields. And then on the Wells site itself, the existing building is going to remain occupied during construction of the new school. That in itself is a very significant constraint. And you can see the existing track and field, which is now going to stay on the site and is also a significant element. And between those two, you can see the Portland Parks and Recreation swimming pool, which is the biggest rock in many ways in the redesign of this site. We have on the north side Southwest Capitol Highway, which is the secondary access into this site. The school fronts Vermont Street, and it will in the future front Vermont Street. But getting access, vehicular access, bus access, and pedestrian access to and through the site is another one of the major constraints that we are addressing in this site design. And you can see a few photographs on the right-hand side. We have that huge grandstand, which we'll be studying. There's a farmer's market at weekends, but most importantly, that pool that many in the community just love and needs to stay. So here we have a before and after, and I have the next slide is a larger after, but on the left-hand side, the plan for the site that was approved last year in the comprehensive plan that we are now reviewing. The major change is that track and field. You can see that it was reoriented north-south, and instead of that, we're now going to keep it, as you can see on the right-hand side, in its existing east-west configuration. And we've dotted on in red an outline of the existing school on that right-hand side to give you a sense of the relationship of the new buildings to that existing school and how we're threading a pretty fine needle. There isn't much space to put a building on, even though this site is huge. And as a result of that, this is a 4-story school. So here we have in more detail the proposed site plan, the track and field again in its existing location. The parking lot is going to be somewhat expanded to replace spaces that are going to be lost. The existing access road all around the site to the north and around to the east or the right-hand side is going to be retained, but we have to re-landscape it. So all those little green dots are new trees, and so we're losing parking. Each tree equals one lost parking space. You can think about it that way. So we have to replace the lost parking spaces. But we're trying to reduce the amount of site work we were doing previously. There is a plan still to resurface all of the fields. Okay, our next slide shows the proposed building massing on this site. So in the foreground we have Vermont Street, and that blue block is a 4-story classroom wing which is cascading down that very steep slope. And to the north of it in yellow we have our athletics facility. That's the 2 gyms. Wells only has 1 gym right now. It's getting 2 gyms per EdSpec. That's what that shows. And purple is the new theater, a 500-seat theater, and the new band and choir rooms. And between these 2 sets of program area, we have in white, kind of tucked between the 2, the new commons at the heart of the school. So that's our basic building organization on the site. Now we're going to transition and talk about the education specification in a slightly different way to how Amber and the Jefferson team just introduced. So we have been instructed in the framework to reduce the building area to approximately 295,000 gross square feet. And so just talking through each of these bars from left to right, the 261,000 gross square foot bars is the existing Ida B. Wells High School. So it's smaller than the proposed education specification, which would have the building be 281,000 gross square feet. The approved comprehensive plan from last year set the size at just around 311,000 gross square feet. And so the new board framework directive is to find a pathway to 295,000 gross square feet. And we've done that in multiple ways. And I just wanted to take a moment and talk about general ed classrooms and to the Jefferson report on its reducing its gen ed classrooms. Jefferson and Ida B. Wells both have very elective programs which are recognized in other parts of the spec now. So it's electives that are shifting from gen ed into other places. For Jefferson, they shifted into dance, so in performing arts. And for Ida B. Wells, the electives shift into CTE. Wells has the most robust CTE program in the district with the exception of Benson. So what we are reducing to make our building a little smaller include reductions in these. I'll just read them quickly. We have a band room. It's smaller than we had intended, but it still exceeds the ed spec recommended size. We have a lot of CTE spaces. We've right-sized those, and we've managed to take 2 rooms out without deleting programs. We have teen parent center reduction that you can see here. We've reduced the number of flexible learning areas. We've reduced the numbers of teacher planning and collaboration spaces, and we have reduced storage. We're still meeting ed spec in these areas. And then I want to speak about classroom size, general education, average classroom size. So this slide represents all of your schools. The orange bars are each of the 3 schools that are in front of you today. We're all aiming at 950 square feet per classroom as our average general education classroom size. The little lonely green bar on the far right-hand side is the existing average at IDB, which is 840 square feet. And on the very far left side, you can see the education spec standard, which is a little higher than our 950 square feet. But you can see that none of your modernized high schools have achieved the target that we are committed to achieving in the 3 high schools that are being modernized now. And now you'll hear echoes from Jefferson here. So this is on the board's framework for the climate policy and LEED Gold certification. On the climate policy, we also are maintaining a commitment to the all-electric infrastructure and are exploring alternative mechanical and structural systems. So that's to the mass timber versus steel issue. We're studying those, or concrete. And LEED Gold, we're seeking sustainable solutions. And I think all of the conversations that happened previously are absolutely pertinent to I2B as well. On community partnerships for I2B, you have asked for the health center that we would only include it if there's a commitment from a provider, and to the teen parent center that we would include it only if there's a demonstrated need. And Stormy talked about the demonstrated need issue that's underway right now. I2B Wells currently has neither a health center or a teen parent center, and so these explorations about need and about providers are extremely important to this community and of great interest. Finally, our next steps slide, and I just want to make a point here. There was a packet that I think it was a preview packet that was sent out that had some additional slides which are not part of this presentation, and we're not and nothing wrong with the content. It was just too much for the time that we have. And so this is my final slide to talk about our next steps. And very similar to Jefferson, we are in the process of test fitting the space program that we have proposed into the building footprint, and we're feeling pretty confident that we'll achieve that target reduction that the framework identifies for us. And the I2B administration is testing its class schedule, its master schedule against our proposed number of classrooms. So that's underway. We can report back on that next time. And construction costs, we have Hoffman Construction as our partner in this project, and they are in the midst of developing a cost model, including looking at pre-construction services. And we had a long conversation today about construction schedule and staging, estimating how much detail you have to get into to think about things at a conceptual level. And finally, we too, bullet before, are looking at alternative facade systems, mechanical and structural systems.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Great. Yeah, let's I guess go backwards from where we started last time. Let's start with Director Hollins. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I actually have a appreciation that for making some of those general aspects higher. And it's great that you actually show us what we actually have done and show us what we are looking to do even better. I think anytime you are building multiple buildings and you learn from the first one and then you get better and better and better. So I just really appreciate that part of that. Just showing that, hey, we are doing a little bit better than we did at the other schools for our general aspects, and showing us that we don't even have our aspects for general ed at any of our schools anyway. Those things are so important, and it's that communication is great. I just have one question. When we talk about the pool and the space around the pool, is there any way to integrate some of the stuff that we need? I don't know, maybe over the top of the pool, or is that just additional cost?
We are exploring. We probably need to replace the pool support building because the current locker and changing facilities for the pool are in the basement of the existing school, which is going to be demolished in order to make way for other site development. And so a new pool support building that will be as minimal as possible will be provided, and we believe that that can also probably be used for school activities in the non-pool season, which is the school season, so it works. So that's one area where we can definitely leverage. Building over the pool is probably cost prohibitive, but we'll continue to look for opportunities.
And the last thing I'll ask about this one is, when we talk about the elevation piece, I think it was going from east to west.
Yeah.
From east to west, and it has a 60-foot slope. I'm assuming we're utilizing at the end of that slope as well for space as well.
We are. We don't want to use the term basement, but we're stepping down the slope and leveraging the slope to maximize how we access the site and how we're making the most cost-effective use of the slope to get the most access to the site. If that makes sense. So when I said that our 4-story classroom building is stepping down the site, it's doing like a step down halfway through its length in order to maximize the use of the site.
Kind of like an old house, like they have sunken living rooms.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hollins. Director Sullivan?
Can you go back to the slide that had the bars on it? The bar.
The classrooms or the whole?
Yeah, there we go.
The classrooms. This one.
That one.
Yeah.
Okay. So the green is the ed spec for classrooms.
Correct.
Okay, and the light green is the existing. Okay, at Ida B. Wells. Okay, yeah. So you're almost up there. I get a little worried on both that they're kind of cutting, it sounds like teacher planning areas. And I know teachers hate walking around with carts carrying their stuff. So just want to make sure teachers are involved in this.
We have teacher planning rooms in our program that are intended to support teachers working in their classrooms. And so with printer hubs and so on, so they don't have to run back to one printer hub. We have distributed printer hubs to support effective classroom teaching. And as Amber mentioned on the Jefferson team, it's had teacher planning rooms added back into its program to support the most flexible use of that school.
Okay, because happy teachers make happy schools.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sullivan. Director Split?
Thanks again for doing what we asked you all to do, and it just warms my heart to see what's possible. I did have a question. It actually came in via text message from my, what is it? It's not Grand Marshal, that's a parade. Who's the head of the marching band?
Drum major?
Drum major. My husband was a drum major, and he has pointed out that 400 square feet seems very small for a band room. Is that the amount it was reduced, or is it legitimately 400 feet? If the classrooms are 950, you're saying it's less than half the size of a classroom.
400 feet would be miniature for a band room.
I know. That's what I'm asking.
So I'm sorry if the slide wasn't clear. I can go back to it here.
It's okay.
So the ed spec band room size is actually 2,200 square feet.
Wonderful.
With an
Thank you.
option for a 2,400 square foot classroom.
Much better than
And we
400.
aspired even greater than that to a 2,800 square foot classroom, which was approved last year in the comprehensive plan. And so what we've done is we've just pulled back slightly to the larger ed spec room, which is 2,400.
2,400 sounds fantastic. Much better than 400. Thank you so much for the clarifying.
Representative Katsavi?
Yeah, I have no questions. I just want to thank the team for their hard work, and I look forward to hearing the community's feedback on this.
Thank you. I forgot who's next. I think Director DePass?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Really great to hear that the students will be left on site, and I hope maybe that's a gold standard for our rebuilds when it's possible. We had a former board member that would have been very upset by a small band room. He was a jazz drummer, so at Ida B. Wells when it was Wilson. And the last is a question about geothermal capacity. So if we're building on a slope and we're trying to meet these climate, specs, meet our climate policy and our wishes for the future. Is there any way to capitalize on the undergroundness to put in a geothermal system? If we're thinking big.
Stealth mechanical engineer.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at her. And I know that like Portland State they have a system that works that is a geothermal system. I don't know if there's any others in Portland, but I was just wondering, since we have that slope, if it could be employed.
The slope doesn't play into it so much as the actual footprint of the site that you have available for the geothermal bores. So it's certainly possible. I think it's probably been studied as far as cost and life cycle cost.
It has been studied and it didn't pan out, but that doesn't mean we couldn't just revisit it for a moment. And we do have a requirement to invest 1.5% of the project funds in green energy technology, and I believe that geothermal is.
I think it has to be actually a hot geothermal source.
Right.
So not
We
just
don't have that.
We just have a heat sink.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't have any other comments, but thank you for this. It's really helpful.
Director Brimmenbergs.
Thanks again for your work. Each of our schools are so different, and that really struck me when I looked at slide 7, because when I used to take my kids they went to a very constrained footprint for high schools, and when they used to go out to Liberty High School, they were like, is this a college campus? And when I look at this picture, it's like, oh, one of the great assets of IW Wells is just the footprint and what you can put there, and all in one place. So I'm excited that you found a way to really utilize all that space in a way to be in service to the students. I asked some other questions that were sort of across the cross projects, and I may have missed this on number 11, slide 11, under the climate policy. It says team is exploring alternate mechanical and structural systems. Is that what connects to the all electric system, or what systems are you referring to there?
So for the so to have a mechanical system that is electrical, there are a variety of types of system that one can have, and we had established what we thought was the basis of design in our previous effort, and we've been revisiting that with input from PPS and from facilities specifically about what is maintainable. So there will be an electric system. It's just a question of which electric system. So that's the alternate mechanical system.
Is that cost or function?
Both.
That you're focused on?
Yeah, both cost and function, and long-term maintainability.
Okay.
And then on structural systems, we're actually using for I2B structural steel as the basis of design for the building, but we'll be studying alternatives to that. So that's to establish a baseline, but given the situation with tariffs and materials and so on, we need to keep up. We're at the point in the design where we can maintain flexibility. We don't have to make a choice now. We can push that down the road until we have more certainty about price and about appropriate systems and about carbon footprint, and we can do all of that study. We have time to do it. Our team has access to RLB, the third-party cost estimator who's doing the estimate on the Jefferson team, and they're doing, on behalf of all 3 projects, a study to report on tariffs and the potential risks, including a sort of local market report on that. So we're anticipating that we'll see that pretty soon as well.
Great. And then on the health center. So I've had my kids in both schools that have health centers, have a school-based health center, and one that didn't. And I know that currently, if you're on the west side, basically if you're at either Lincoln or IW Wells, students who need to utilize a school-based health clinic are told to take a bus to go to Cleveland or Benson. So I'm really hoping if there's a demonstrated need, which it sounds like there is, that a provider, and I'm wondering if, maybe not one of you 3, but somebody has an update on where we are with securing a provider.
We don't have an update on the provider. We do have the principal here, and I think she might like to say something if that's all right.
Okay.
I should come up here and use the mic. Hey
there, I'm Aisha Conning. I'm the principal of Ida B. Wells High School. Thanks for giving me a couple minutes. We have been working really hard to find a partner for a West Side school-based health center. We believe there's a great need. We have the largest, or one of the largest, refugee immigrant populations in Portland attending Ida B. Wells High School. And oftentimes our students need support, health support, medical support, and are asked to take an hour and a half bus across town. There's 4 school-based health centers at 4 different comprehensive high schools on the east side, all within a couple miles of each other, and there's nothing on the west side. So I have been actively involved in trying to partner with OHSU, Providence, Multnomah County. We definitely need a school-based health center on the west side.
And I just wanted to second that. I know that obviously it's a board's decision that fits within your framework, but I think about the time that's needed to complete the design and then the amount of years it'll take to get to completion. And I just certainly want to believe that there'll be some possibilities and partnerships within the, few years. And so I really hope that you all take that into consideration when thinking about your framework. Is that just the timing of things and the guidance of a confirmed partnership and the small window, and then what may come to be before the high school is even complete.
Thank you, Dr. Split.
Thank you.
On that subject, and great to see you, Principal Cunning. Thanks for being here. On that subject, I certainly agree that we should have a student-based health center on the west side. I'm wondering about if there's a way to be flexible about where exactly it is. And I realize we're talking school-based health center and it should be at the school. I totally understand that. But with the site constraints that you've mentioned, is it possible this is something that becomes something that's on the massive amounts of property PPS has in that area that can be built separately later? Or is it something we can look at? Like, I think about where that immigrant population is centered in the community, and we have Jackson, which has a surplus of space. I mean, we just fit another middle school in there recently. So I'm just curious if there's any room to ever be, it looks like she's going to answer, if there's any room to be creative or if it has to be in this building.
Well, my hope is that it would be in the building, and one of the things that I heard the team say is that there's a priority for CTE programming, and so I know in definitely spaces that I visited in, health centers also serve as workspaces for students that are in those health pathways. I don't know if that's planned for Ida B. Wells, but
Yes, absolutely. We have an award-winning CTE Health Occupations pathway and program, the largest in the district, and we're partnered really closely with OHSU for that CTE Health Occupations program. So we've been courting OHSU. However, there are some funding issues, as I'm always learning in this job, that school-based health centers are not particularly profitable. So that's part of our challenge. And I wanted to ask Becca to speak to the space, the school-based health center space that is somewhat in the design.
So in the test fit that we're doing right now, this sort of next step, we are assuming that there is a health clinic, and so we are trying to include it in the building. And while we do have this lovely big site and it could potentially go somewhere else on the site, a reason to have the health clinic in the school itself is twofold. One is students are more likely to engage with the services of the health clinic if it's in the building, particularly students who want to be kind of shy about what they're doing, why they're going. And also because we do have this potential tie-in with the CTE program, having it all in one facility is where keeping the kids in the school.
Thank you. That makes sense to me, and I would just say what you just said was actually kind of what I was asking. Can we be creative, and if we can do it within the existing with existing parameters that we've already been talking about today? All good. I just thought we were going to have to add it beyond that. So thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
and I was going to wait to the end to say this, but I'm going to just insert it here quickly. I hope that, I know that there's also community meetings about just the redesign of some things. I would hope that there are some things, like even going back to Jefferson in the dance or the theater, that what comes up from community is taken into account with at least some flexibility to extend beyond ed specs if there's a trade-off on something else. And so I think of Ida B. Wells the same way, and I'm sure with Cleveland there'll be something there too. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we have community groups in the DAGs, while still also looking at the framework as a guiding document, but not that we're so, stuck on the framework that there isn't an opportunity to engage in conversation about well, if not that, then what?
Director Collins, I saw your hand up, but is it about the health center?
Yeah, and Director Smith, she basically asked the same question, that we can be creative in ways we can, maybe we use it like for the CTE program, and then when we do get a relationship, to be able to bring it to full usage, then it could be flexible enough to turn into that at a later time.
Thank you. Director Brimowitz?
Yeah, this is just a site question. One of the other cost reduction strategies in the Cornerstone report was reducing the amount of basement space. And I'm curious, I forgot to ask it for Jefferson, but is there basement space being planned for this? And have you reduced it as part of following the framework?
Oh, we've radically reorganized and rearranged the building on the site. It previously had a basement that, so it still has it's got a partial subgrade, if that makes sense, because of the stepping site. Other than that, it has no basement. So
you're using the slope?
Yes.
As kind of like a daylight basement?
Yes, but we don't want to use the basement word. But yes.
But it's so Southwest Portland. We love our daylight basements in Southwest Portland.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have one more thing about the health center. I'm fully supportive of the health center. I think it makes sense that we have so many on the east side and none on the west side, that we need one on the west side. I guess my question is, does that require an amendment from the board on the language of that, or is that, because would it be something that a demonstrable need? No? Okay. Okay.
So I would just say, especially if the idea is that we have it as flex space until somebody's identified that could do it, used for the CTE or something like that, which is what you seem to be leaning toward maybe. Anyway, never mind. If it's not that, then don't worry.
Well, if they don't have a school-based health temporarily, you need space for the school nurse, which is the alternative. It's not at all the same, just to be clear, but if you're still hunting for or trying to land a provider, that is what the space is that they use it for in the other schools.
Yes, and we do have a follow-up meeting with OHSU on Thursday, so we're still in talks with OHSU as a potential partner.
And we can absolutely design a clinic space so that it could be, imagine what it would be if it wasn't a clinic. I think that would be a very useful way to go about this exercise. Grant High School built a clinic and then the operator backed out, and so that space is used for something else. I think we should design this building with that in mind.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you,
I just
thank
want to
you.
also throw out kudos to the architects that were able to pivot this thing faster than I can build Lego, so thank you.
Thank you.
It's pretty impressive.
All right. We've got our Cleveland team coming up.
Good evening, directors. My name is Eric Girding, Senior Project Manager with OSM for the Cleveland High School Modernization Project and Cleveland High School alumnus.
And I'm Abby Dacey. I'm the principal in charge for our combined Malum Studio Petretti architecture team. So we will I'll start by discussing site constraints. As you know, Cleveland High School is separated across 3 different sites, all along Powell Boulevard, which is a state highway. And so those sites total 11.5 acres, which would make it the second smallest site in the district. The school site itself is 4 acres. This view is from the opposite corner of the other image. This is from the northeast side on 28th Avenue, looking towards the existing building. The 2 to 3 story existing building fills the entire site. As you can see, there is next to no secure outdoor space for students to be outside of the school. There's also no extra space for construction, logistics, and things like that on this site. And the reason I'm revisiting that is just to help understand that the framework we set up a year ago in the comprehensive plan set the stage for a very efficient school plan that takes advantage of the site. What you can't really see in this image is that it is also sloped. There's about a 20-foot grade change between 26th Avenue and 28th Avenue. And that's both a challenge and a kind of a blessing, because it's allowing us to make some different decisions about where things coincide with grade. So on the right, you see our proposed design for the school. This is very similar to what we shared almost a year ago with the comprehensive plan. And so we've organized the school into two very efficient kind of buildings on the north and the south side of the site. They frame a outdoor space, which now creates the only outdoor space available to students, a secure outdoor courtyard. These buildings are also organized to allow, they're 4 stories, so they're very efficient, and then they allow daylight to all the learning spaces. And what that lets us do is create this central courtyard space, which allows learning and teaching to flow out into the outdoor space, lunch to come into the space, which is a function that the school does not have now. So looking ahead to the board's framework, we have been going through, just like the other 2 schools, very similar sets of elements, and we will briefly walk through those recommendations right now.
So for contractor cost reductions, we're working with Skanska USA Building, who's our CMGC contractor, working with them on what we call our general conditions, which are sort of all the things that they need to do during construction to support the construction efforts. Looking at trying to get efficiencies there with our tower cranes. Specifically, there's a high cost with tower cranes, so we're trying to reduce down to 1 if we can. Also just looking at the costs of worker parking during construction and management staffing, and just being really efficient with our construction planning and support. And also just want to highlight that the function of the contractor fee does reduce when the overall project construction cost reduces. And then within equity and contracting, we have acknowledged that there's a premium cost in that plan to meet our aspirational goals for certified business participation. And we're just working with Skanska to put together a procurement plan that can maximize those goals, but to minimize additional costs. And so we'll be coming back with more detail on that.
So we, with our constrained site, we've had, I would say, limited opportunities in terms of where we could build, which is why we came up with this very efficient set of 4-story buildings. So what you see here in yellow are the zones that will be reduced in terms of square footage. We've found we have reduced the building by about 23,000 square feet to bring it to the 295,000 square foot target. So while these little yellow slivers look rather small at this scale, because they are each 4 stories tall, and entire building width wide, they actually add up to a full amount of savings. And we're able to meet the requirements of the ed spec as well as the Cleveland specific needs. In this, we do have some subgrade space because, as we mentioned, we have the sloped site. We were able to reduce the amount of that space. Most of it is actually in already excavated space where the existing locker rooms are underneath the Cleveland gym. We also will just note that the electrical room for an all-electric building is slightly bigger than what the ed spec allows, about 1,000 square feet bigger. We've been able to work that in and still maintain the 295,000 square feet. So just in terms of specifics, what we are imagining might be changing in our proposed plan would be changes to 3 general education classrooms and 1 science room. So these would bring those counts down to the ed spec recommendation number. Previously, the numbers had been based on some of the preferred ed spec spaces and some of the lessons learned in past projects, which is why the program square footage was above what we're proposing today. Some changes to extended learning spaces, the size of the athletic spaces, and the performing arts spaces, again, reducing those to the ed spec recommendation numbers rather than the preferred or the lessons learned spaces. Looking at the loading dock and some of the custodial and back of house spaces for more efficiencies, as well as the size of the health clinic and the teen parent center, and the indoor track, which was a feature we had inside this building because of the detached nature of the rest of the site features.
So with the health center, we did receive a letter of intent from Multnomah County to continue operating the health center at Cleveland High School at the modernized facility and also at the Marshall campus. So at Marshall campus there is a health center space in that school, and so they said that they would come with the Cleveland program during construction and then return back to the new school. And regarding the Teen Parent Center, like the other projects, we're still working with PPS staff to get a better understanding of what the demonstrated need is for the Teen Parent Center program. We are looking at the possibility of providing that. It's currently in our area program, but just at a reduced size where we can still meet the program requirements, but perhaps not allocate as much space as we've done on other projects.
All right, the athletic site, as you know, is 4 blocks away from the main site. So we've designed in a field house to accommodate some of the features that we can't rely on since the existing high school is not adjacent. We are proposing that we reduce the size of that field house and reduce the number of team rooms in that space from 3 to 2. We had also located originally it was actually part of the field house. We relocated the storage into a separate lower cost facility, and now we are proposing that we'll actually integrate that under the grandstands in a more efficient way. And then in terms of LEED Gold and all electric infrastructure, I think this is the same that we've heard with Jefferson High School and Ida B. Wells. So we are looking for all the opportunities we can to make the healthiest school for our students and the environment while reducing or avoiding unnecessary costs. And of course we have the all-electric infrastructure, and then we are looking to optimize all the other pieces related to that, including the mechanical system and the structural system. And then this is our last slide, just sharing a few of the other things we're looking at in terms of reducing cost. We had a raised loading dock, which was requiring some extra excavation on the north side of the building. We're working through a way to not have that be the case. Also reducing some of the storage spaces that had grown in the preferred program. We're also working very closely with our contractor to simplify our exterior material systems and optimize the structural systems between or across the buildings.
Thank you all.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'll open this up for questions. Director Salt.
I have a question, just so I've heard from Cleveland parents and a couple teachers about concerns about the performing arts spaces and then the athletic spaces. Just to clarify, those spaces, they meet the ed spec, but they don't exceed it like they had in the previous plan?
Yes.
So they meet the ed spec?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Consavi?
Yeah, I think my question was kind of regarding like the specifics of the reduction for like the performing arts, kind of like what does that reduction look like?
Yeah, so in the preferred program that we had established with the comprehensive plan, it affected just some of the sizes of spaces. So for example, the size of the black box theater or the size of some of the support spaces, say the band room, we already talked about that today. So it would be making those rooms the size that they are in the ed spec, which would be very comparable to what you would see at a Lincoln High School or McDaniel High School.
Thank you. Director Sullivan?
Yes, I seem to remember in a earlier meeting that this site would not work for steel and concrete, that we'd have to use mass timber. Is that correct?
It will not work for tilt-up concrete because there's not enough room to lay down concrete and then tilt it up without closing Powell. We currently have a structural system, the south building, where we have the larger spaces, the theater and the gym. We're currently looking at all steel and concrete structure. So we have larger spans, it's more efficient there. And then the north building, we have been looking at a very efficient approach to mass timber. And given the current economic climate, that maybe means we can hedge our bets and have a little of each.
Right. Also in the original, or the first drawing where you cut off the little slices in yellow to make it smaller. Does that just mean you're cutting all the rooms a little smaller or taking out?
What we're
rooms,
able
or-
to do is look really closely at our floor plan, and because of the areas that we are reducing from, like I said, the 3 classrooms, for example, we're able to reduce all of the kind of the overall bay length while keeping all the classrooms at the same size we had been designing for, which is about 960 square feet per classroom. So we do have fewer classrooms, but we were able to put other program pieces in those areas near the yellow cuts.
Thank you.
Yeah, quick question. With the reduction in the field house from 3 to 2 teams, does that still allow accommodation for, like, for example, our non-cisgendered students to have the accommodations that they need?
Yeah, we'll have some single occupant spaces for changing and restrooming.
Okay, thank you.
Some questions. Thank you. And just having been at the DAG where you walk through the framework with the community, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the approach of delivering a awesome high school that meets the ed specs and reduces costs. And I'm going to ask, I know the answer, but the basement, because I know that there's site considerations and there was a basement contemplated. So can you speak to that? Just
So like we said, there's a grade change on the site. So from 26th to 28th Street, it changes by 20 feet, which is, essentially 1 story, a little bit more. So we have areas that are open to the courtyard and to the adjacent streets when they're on the west side of the site. And then as they move further east, some of them start to come underground. We've reduced the amount of that space. In the north bar, it's entirely already excavated because of where the locker rooms are in the gym. So like we're already down at that level, below grade. The space where we have put program in the south bar that would be kind of underground, if you will, is the locker rooms, the spaces we don't want to have windows into to begin with. So it's the most efficient place we can put them on the site.
Okay, so you've reduced that. And then, I don't think this was part of this exercise, but can you speak to the other, like, pretty major cost reduction you did through the change in the schedule?
Yes.
Or is that, it's been revealed, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
we've talked to the design advisory group about that. It was, when we brought on Skanska as our contractor on a kind of limited contract basis last fall to do an estimate with the design team at the end of our schematic design phase. The original 2020 bond plan allocated a 2-year construction duration for the Cleveland project, really kind of based on historically how we've done 2-year construction durations on Grant, Franklin, and McDaniel. And that's kind of what our approach was. If you go back into the details of the comprehensive plan that the team produced last year, it did highlight challenges in making that schedule work because of the severe site constraints that we have at Cleveland. And then when Skanska came on board and put together their estimate, which includes a detailed construction schedule and all of their requirements that they need to build the structure during that duration, they highlighted a significant extra cost that would be required for overtime and sort of a lack of productivity, more or less, to meet that 2-year schedule on the tight site that we have, which more or less translated into 6 10-hour days for workers over many months. And so this was in the magnitude of around almost $40 million of just direct labor cost of overtime in order to meet that schedule. And knowing that we have a limited budget, what came from that effort, if we were to maintain that schedule, then that additional cost would have to come out of the construction cost to cover that labor overtime premium. The other thing that introduced was just a higher risk as far as just worker safety for working that many months, weeks on end, over time. Also the impact on our neighbors and the community of having long shifts 6 days a week on our site. And so there's a proposed schedule extension to go into a third year of construction duration in order to alleviate that overtime cost so that we wouldn't have to take that cost out of the actual project. And so we've realized that savings just by extending the schedule. And so what that does mean is that proposed schedule would equate to a 3-year relocation for the Cleveland program at the Marshall campus.
So I asked you that question not because I like the 3-year schedule, and I know it's disappointing for the Cleveland community, but I don't think people would have seen it otherwise. And this is, so it's part of also that all the schools are adjusting somewhat, so we keep within our budget, because if it's 40 million, it wouldn't be the school that we would want to deliver for the Cleveland community. So I appreciate you going through that, and again, it's a cost reduction that other people, that the broader community might not see, but it's part of the trade-off, and everybody trying to get to delivering our high schools, high-quality high schools, but within our budget. I had one last question about outdoor spaces. So I don't see anywhere in the schematics either Hosford or Powell Park. And given that was part of what the board approved and actually how you, I think, meet your basic Title IX requirements, is it just not in the schematic, or what happened to it?
Well, yeah, currently it's, I mean, we have been given authorization to study that and to work on conceptual designs for potential improvements at Powell Park for baseball and softball, as well as an option for a softball field at Hosford Middle School. And so I know there's been some shift in kind of the conversation around that scope of work and how it's identified within the bond. Up until recently, it was kind of its own sort of line item and its own potential cost. And so we've been treating it that way as far as not including that in the pricing of the actual Cleveland High School modernization. But that work is being done in tandem by the team. We also see that there's potentially, most likely, a different method of contracting and constructing that work that would likely be outside of the full modernization contract. So there's some nuances there as far as how it may be designed and carried out and executed as work. But we have proceeded with doing those studies, and we're going to start opening conversations with parks about those ideas.
So just so I can summarize.
Yeah, so it's not, it
because-
didn't show up in the materials that we submitted today.
Okay, I think it would make the community feel better if it was in the materials. And I know that when the staff report and also like what we're telling voters is that it's included, and because this is our big swing to get have all our high schools get what they need. I was just counting the fields at Ida B. Wells, and there was like five fields in addition to tennis courts, and so I just hope we keep moving everything together, because we are messaging and communicating to voters that they're going to get their finished product.
And we're happy to
Let me
provide
know what I need to do to be
some-
helpful.
Yes. No, thank you. And we can provide the board with information about that study.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate all the work that you put into this. This is a very impressive report, and yeah, just super appreciative of all the work. I mean, you did amazing work here. Before we end here, I just want to kind of remind everybody kind of our North Star, the reason why we're doing all this, right? And just for everybody who's paying attention, is, one of the things is one of the benefits of what we want as a board is to make sure that all our new high schools, Jefferson, Cleveland, and Wells, gets everything what every other high school has gotten, and maybe probably more because there's a benefit for going last, right? But at the same time, reducing costs but minimizing impact to features, or hopefully no impact to features. But just also a reminder for like every 20, $30 million that we can save, that could mean potentially another elementary school that could get an updated HVAC heating cooling system or important upgrades that they need. So I just kind of remind, whoever's watching this, this is the whole reason why we're doing this, is to make sure that we maximize the amount of dollars that we have, the limited amount of dollars to affect the most students possible. So again, with that said, truly appreciate the work that you put into this, and thank you.
Right. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have the first readings. We have two policy proposed, revisions. That were referred out of policy committee meeting. First up, we have the Board of Education 1.20.010-P and the Ethics and Conflicts of Interest Policy 5.10.066-P. Director Bridmembers, could you walk us through these proposed revisions?
I'm going to run through them. How about that?
Run through them, please. That's much better.
Okay. So the first is the Board of Education policy, and when we were planning for the vacancy that was created by Director Scott's resignation, we looked more closely at the policy and discovered that there is something in our policy that does not align with state law. This is a very simple striking of a language from the Board of Education policy that says, the language we're striking is, if no eligible zone resident declares interest in the vacant position, the board shall appoint an eligible resident from the district at large. And that's not allowed by state law. So we're striking that. So that's the first one that's coming out for first reading. The second one is a revision to the ethics and conflict of interest policy. And this is adding a new section. This policy has lays out a number of ethics and conflicts of interest guidelines for board members, for staff, and it's adding a new provision that says relating to restrictions on board members' employment by the district, and just adding the language, current board members may not apply for or accept any offer of employment from the district. And the key word here is current. And the rationale for this is, and this evolved from, brought this forward, and I brought forward something that had a longer cooling off period or waiting period, and we've adjusted it. But given that the board oversees the superintendent and has approval and oversight of all of the district spend, this policy creates a new standard that board members must wait till their board service is over before looking for employment at Portland Public Schools. And also that the district can't offer a current board member employment while they're a board member. After they're done, and this is a change, so there had been a year-long cooling off period, which is sort of a standard cooling off period in a lot of other places. Based on it, and Director Hollins sent a number of questions in, suggested a shorter cooling off period. He actually suggested 6 months, I believe. But then also asked a number of legal questions. We checked with counsel. The legal questions weren't questions of impingement on board members. And then ultimately in the committee discussion, we eliminated any of the cooling off period. So you just can't be a current board member when you're applying for a position. Again, just the power dynamics, and you have influence over the superintendent and district staff. So it's just adding a very one sentence to the ethics and conflict policy.
Great, thank you. Director Sullivan?
Yes, and Julia, I voted to bring that in this form, but somebody mentioned to me that would mean that if you had a teacher on the board and their time was, their finishing their last year. They're not going to run again. There's no way they could get back into Portland Public Schools because you have to apply, pretty early at least before July 1st. So it wouldn't mean you'd be working, but you couldn't even apply for the job. So I don't know. The whole thing just seems maybe unnecessary to me. I can't see who it's protecting.
Yeah, just Director Sullivan, I think I was the one that mentioned that. I just want to kind of reiterate the majority of our employees, and I just want something for the policy committee to consider. The majority of our employees are school-based employees, right? They work, and that means they work a school calendar year. And so, for example, if a teacher or principal or EA or whatever would want to apply for the board, and he is planning for like a 4-year sabbatical to do work on the board. Again, remember, teachers don't make a lot of money, not enough.
But more than a board member does.
Yeah, exactly. They would have to be working for free. Anyways, the whole point is that because the application period for typical school districts is from January to April, right? But a board's term is not up until June 30th, which means that that board member can no longer apply during that period, which means that they would have to be taking a 5-year sabbatical, and that's a penalty for a lot of our employees that potentially could not afford to wait 5 years unless they go to another district. My personal case, like for example, if I decide I want to go back to Benson, I would not be able to apply. I would have to take another year off or go out of district, which is what I would never want to do. Sorry, not never. That's a strong word. I would prefer to stay in PPS.
Yeah,
May I go because I haven't spoken yet. I didn't vote to pass this on to the whole board on the basis of I also didn't think it was necessary, but more on an overreach and a question about governance versus management. And the board doesn't make any hiring decisions except for the superintendent and the internal auditor. We don't make teacher decisions or any other senior staff decisions, and I do believe we need to hold ourselves accountable to an ethical standard, but I think that the policy doesn't really get at. I don't even know how we would enforce it. So I'm not supportive of the policy now, and I think your reasoning pushes me even that much further. But it's absolutely the decision lies at the superintendent and her staff to hire people.
From Edwards, and then I'll go to Hollins after. Oh, I don't know if you want to respond first, and then I'll go to Hollins. Director Hollins.
So a couple things. I don't see how it's overreach. We have a whole policy on ethics and conflicts. The best ethics rules are written and implemented not after there's an issue, but before. And if you look at the org chart of the district, the board is at the top of the org chart, or the org chart. And so, and I'm going to address the school-based issue, because I thought about, like, okay, what would an exemption look like, because that seems reasonable. So I think it's worth having a discussion about, because I think the contemplation was like central office-based positions. And I think when we consider that, also consider what it would be like if you were a principal interviewing a sitting board member. And we may not think we have, like, we only do one thing, but actually we do a lot of things. I mean, tonight we had the, conversation about the superintendent's evaluation, but we do a lot of things that impact schools, and it just sets a higher standard. I think I'm open to like what you might suggest, and I also think we have to think about the power that we may not know that we have. That we in fact do have a lot of power. We have power over their budget, over staffing. What we advocate for, what we stay silent on. So I guess this is the first reading, so we welcome additional discussion.
Great, thank you, Director Hollins.
Yes. I just wanted to, Director DePass said something. I want to get some clarity when she said we only employee we hire is the superintendent and auditor. But we actually have influence on who the superintendent hire. As case in point, when she was looking to add additional staff member on, the board was like, no, we don't agree with that. So even though we don't directly hire, but we actually do have influence over who the superintendent hires, which once again, I think that's a management issue versus a governance issue, but we have made those decisions.
We also, as you know, have to terminate employees as well. And we annually, renew the contracts. Is that board packet that has like everybody listed? Again, I think I would open to like what would be a reasonable thing. Also recognizing that we do, in many ways, touch every school and have a lot of influence over that. And how do we minimize, like, not use our undue influence from our positions? So I would welcome your thinking, and Director Sullivan's as well, having been in that position.
Great, thank you.
I have one final question, and I'm just wondering if this has come up in our recent history, or, I mean, I'm not sure what we're trying to solve for. Has it been
So
an issue in
again,
the past?
I shared with you an article where a board member had been hired and for like a brand new position in the central office, and it wasn't while he was currently a board member, but it caused a lot of questions, and I think sort of spoke to credibility of the district with the broader community, that somehow a board member kind of got a sweetheart position that was created for them. And I'll just go back to the best ethics and conflict of interest rules are the ones that are written in advance, not in response to. So that, and we have a framework actually at the state that in many cases the ethics rules were written in response to, legislators going to Hawaii and accepting a lot of gifts, and which really damaged the institution's credibility. I mean, they fixed it, but it was afterwards, and not without a lot of damage, that still goes on, that, people still think there's these lavish parties and entertainment and gifts that, like, aren't allowed now because it's been
Bourbons.
fixed.
Director Split?
Under $50.
Thanks. Yeah. In thinking about it, sure, I'm deeply familiar with, we call it revolving door. That's a policy with legislators that when they leave office, they have a cooling off period before they can become registered lobbyists in the state of Oregon, for example. And you see in DC, they don't have that. And you do, at least I don't think so. And you see frequently people leave Congress and then get these like cushy, high paying lobbying jobs after they've been in Congress for a while. And so I certainly see how they operate in other settings. I do find it interesting. I don't know how to think about it at this point, but the idea of somebody who's leaving and wants to go back to teaching, I see what you're saying about the interview process being challenging in that case, but also if that's someone's livelihood and they've taken a leave to serve on the board or something. So I will take advantage of the 21 days before we can reconsider this and listen to public comment very carefully, because just because I could see somebody being in that position, and maybe there's a place where we can find some sort of, process point where like we have this as the general rule of thumb, but there's some sort of process for an exception or something like that. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there. Haven't thought it through, but I'll be paying close attention for the next 21 days. And like I said, it seems like standard practice to me because I'm used to it at the legislature, but open to a conversation about it as we pursue our second reading. Thanks.
Representative Katsavi?
Yeah, I would say I'm generally in support of the policy, especially what Director Bermed was saying was sometimes our influence that we don't even know we have, especially on our staff, is really important. But I would definitely love to hear if the superintendent has a perspective or any thoughts around this.
Oh, I don't have any thoughts or perspective. Just thinking of myself, 8 months, 18 days in the role. I don't have the history or the experiences at this point to determine if the policy is helpful or hurtful. So I just encourage the board to make the decision that's best for them.
Just quickly in response, I mean, I get in DC with the lobbying and stuff and landing a high pay job, but I just want to also point out every job in education is underpaid, period. Overworked and underpaid. And that's something to consider too. So, thank you. Any other comments? All right. Thank you, Director Brim Edwards, for introducing these policies and running through them. All right, next up we have our, just kind of reiterate really quick. The policies proposed will be posted on the board website, and the public comment period is going to be a minimum is required of 21 days. Contact information for public comment will be posted with the policy. The board expects to hold a second reading of the revised policies, if they are revised, which is a vote to approve them on April 8th. Thank you. All right, next up we have our budget work session on school-based resources. Superintendent Armstrong, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the team coming forward. Just a couple of updates that we're going to provide. It'll be the preliminary school staffing. It'll be on our preliminary reductions list and then our legislative actions. So welcoming up our Chief Financial Officer, Michelle Morrison, Chief of Schools, Dr. John Franco, and Chief of Staff, Deborah Kafori. Thank you.
Woohoo, budget, yoo-hoo. Dr. Armstrong, I think you were kicking it off.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry. The agenda, as I discussed or quickly outlined, is an opportunity for us to share and discuss with you preliminary school staffing and what was received to our schools. Share and discuss an updated preliminary reductions list. I think I had shared earlier that there had been some changes, so we're prepared to walk you through that. And then share and then engage in discussion around our legislative updates.
Thank you for having us here tonight. We're going to move fairly quickly. You've had these materials in your packet now, and I assume you have sent questions or will be sending questions. And Dr. Franco is going to walk us through some of the changes as we moved into the staffing process with our principals.
Okay. All right. So, as you can see here, our focus throughout this entire budget process, as we're looking at an immense reduction, is to maintain investments that have the biggest impact on student outcomes while supporting fiscal sustainability in our system. And then with that, you'll see throughout this presentation this notion of school flexibility and stability as much as possible. Next slide. So I just want to highlight kind of a few big pieces here. Is the first bullet in terms of we intentionally did not raise class size across the board. I think that's a big piece, and that is very specific to all grade bands. We did see some bumps in FTE removed based on school status, so in regards to CSI or TSI designation. We have retained strategic school supports, although in some cases at a decreased level. For example, all schools will have at least a 0.5 FTE for a school-based instructional coach, which if you talk specifically with principals, they'll say that the instructional coach model has been extremely supportive. Also, the flexibility was added to allow principals to accommodate needs in their schools with some allocations. Enrollment decline contributes to about 9% of school-based FTE reductions, and then we have adjusted our preliminary school staffing reductions the plan based on feedback. So adding overall 37 FTE specific to schools. And that ranges specifically to about instructional coaches, student interventionists, also adding back some non-formula APs, and then also some very school climate support specific to the middle school. Pre-kindergarten programming is continuing at the same level, and also our equity formula, which we're very proud about, is also not changing. Next slide. So if you look here at the elementaries going specific to grade bands, we'll talk a little bit about this. So, you know, an adjustment we did made in terms of staffing allocation was this notion of blending in upper elementary grades. And so that is very specific to 4th and 5th grade, or I would say this, to upper grades. So that's 3, 4, 5, right, in terms of the intermediate levels. Kindergarten educational assistants are still in play. But that's very specific to Title I schools with class sizes of more than 20. Also, schools will retain support from their instructional coach. That was an add back where all of our elementary and middles will carry an instructional coach. Also, our IB supports are no longer allocated due to lack of IB pathways to upper grades. At the middle school level, a minimum class size of 15 students has been established. So if you think about the staffing ratio, and again, when we say this, is that we have to look overarchingly at how we schedule. And so the reality is, if we have class sizes lower than 15, we really have to look on whether or not we offer that class, right, in order to save money in that area. Dual language immersion supplemental resources are aligned to enrollment-based need. And so that's a big piece. We believe in our DLI programs, of course, and so we are staffing them accordingly, and that's based on enrollment. So we're not seeing a reduction from that vantage point. The Title I supplemental resources are reduced from a base of 2 to 1. So what we've generally done in the past is that we've applied what we call a bump, right, regardless of enrollment. And so we're taking away 1.0 of that FTE in regards to the bump for title schools. Schools will retain support from instructional coaches, and they also receive discretional FTE, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, to be used for either instructional coach, an RJ coordinator, school climate specialist, or social worker. So that's where that flexibility piece comes into play. So we coined that in terms of the allocation as a 1.0 climate addition, which they have some flexibility to use based on some school autonomy there. Next slide. So at the high school, and I just mentioned the minimum or target of a minimum of 15. And I will say that there are exceptions to that because we're very cognizant about loss of program, specifically at the high school level. And so there are exception pieces in play there where if you're going to offer a class of lower than 15, it has to be approved by a senior director of schools. The reduction of the career coordinator funded by general fund. So high schools, they also, and I want you to, so high schools also do have support of a Measure 98 funded college coordinator as well. And so what we did here is we applied a 0.5 license FTE allocation, which schools could ultimately determine on how to use. So if they wanted to convert that, for example, to a 1.0 PFSP position, they could do that. So they have flexibility in regards to that.
Can you say what PF?
Sorry, that's our classified positions, correct.
Thank you. Got it.
For the career,
You're
correct.
referencing the union.
Correct. So that is correct. So the 0.5, we allocated a 0.5 licensed allocation, and so that is a PAT potential license. However, if a school wanted to, say, convert that to a full-time, they could, but it wouldn't be a license, it would be a PFSP position. Multilingual learners, so itinerant staff will continue, then this is a piece too with our MLs. We want to make sure that all of our MLs across the district are receiving support. So we do have itinerant staff because, how we allocate, it's not always in 1.0 increments because we just don't have the numbers across the board. And so we may see a school needing a 0.25, right, support for a ELD teacher. And so that's where their itinerant staff comes into play. Weighting has changed, so all schools receive FTE based on student need. And then for special education, and I know Chief Buno talked about this at his last presentation, is that there are no significant changes planned in terms for special education. Next slide. Do you want me to talk about this? Okay, I guess I'm just running through it, this whole thing. So central office personnel, non-personnel budgets will be reduced next school year, and non-personnel reduction. So we're focusing on, contracted services, also PD, professional development, and travel. We are still, and you know that Chief Morrison will go a little bit more into this in terms of, we still have more decisions to make from a central office perspective. And that information will be coming. Next slide. So as you can see here, this first piece, and we did this last year as well in regards to the 40 million, and our principals or our schools wanted to see this as well. So we have gone through an immense budget engagement process, not only with community and stakeholders, but with building staff, building leaders. And so at our first proposal, you could see the percentage here of what it looked like in terms of the reduction percentage-wise. It was roughly a 70-30, but based on feedback and more engagement sessions, we were able to close the gap in regards to the percentage of central office versus school-related reductions.
Yeah, I'd just like to, can we go back to that slide, please? Yeah, to expand on this just a little bit, central office, I think for some of our staff and our community members, they often think of just people like me that sit at the central office and look over our programs, and really that can impact facilities, transportation, all of those support services that do directly impact schools. So I just wanted to clarify that when we're talking about central office, it's really about more central department supports for schools. Next slide. So we have some additional considerations that I know you guys are already aware of. We've shared this before. We are planning for a 25% reduction in Title I and some of our other federal programs, just giving the information we have so far from our national partners. Additional federal programs may be reduced. We're especially monitoring carefully for our nutrition services program, being a fully CEP district at this time. And then other programs that have aligned with this budget that are going away, they're just ending. It's the end of their grant term. So those also may impact what we're feeling in our schools and central office. All right.
Deborah Kafori, Chief of Staff. Before we get into this slide, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a federal update. After weeks of uncertainty at our federal level, the Congress did pass a continuing resolution which allows fiscal year FY 2025, which we're in right now, appropriations, and provides level funding for most of our key K-12 formula programs, including IDEA, Title I, Title IV-A, and REAP. However, in an unprecedented move, Congress did not include what is known as an explanatory statement, which provides detailed explanations of specific funding levels and priorities that Congress intends, and that means that the administration will have more discretion in allocating those funds. Unfortunately, Title II falls under this category. So hypothetically, and we're watching very carefully and closely, the administration could provide less than the level of funding that they had allocated prior in this current budget. Also to note, at a state level, on Thursday, our Attorney General Dan Rayfield, alongside 20 other Democratic attorneys general, filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration's plan to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. So now we will go to, and I'm sure that's a very brief summary of what's happening at a federal level, just to know that we are continuing to keep a close eye on what is occurring at the federal level and how it affects K-12 schools. You've seen this slide before. We are in mid-March now. The Ways and Means co-chair's budget is going to be released very, very soon, hearing different stories about when that might occur. And then we see the May revenue forecast coming on the 14th, and then statutory adjournment date of June 28th. Next slide, please. So this is a list of many of our key bills. Just to let you know that in March and in April, the Ways and Means Committee is going on a road show. This Saturday, they'll be in Gresham. Saturday, March the 22nd, they'll be in Gresham from 10 to 12 at the Mount Hood Community College Theater. On April 16th, they will be there. There's other places that they're going to. I'm just talking about the ones that are more pertinent to us. On April the 16th, they will be in Salem, and that will be an evening session from 5 to 7 in Hearing Room F. They will also have virtual options. Roseanne, after this meeting, will be sending all of you the links so that you can sign up to testify or to submit written testimony. We obviously are available to help if you're interested in doing any of that. This week, or actually last week, the governor released her accountability bills, which House Bill 2009 and Senate Bill 141. Superintendent Armstrong held a press conference last week to agree with the concept of accountability. We all agree accountability is necessary, but also to, again, advocate for a funding level that is adequate, at the very least. Obviously, we'd love more, but at least, very least adequate to serve our students, so we don't have to make the $40 million of cuts. On March the 27th, the State School Fund bill, which is Senate Bill 5516, is being heard. And if you're interested, Superintendent Armstrong will be there. If you're interested in attending March 27th from 1 to 2:30, please let either myself or Lisa Merrick know, and we will hopefully get you on the list, but at very least you can come down and support us. Next slide. Lots of words on this page, just to know that the last legislative forecast was on February 26th. The result is that Oregon has a little bit more money. Looks like a lot to us. To them, it's just a little bit. And that means that we are still expecting a kicker at the tune of $1.7 billion. And this is when we all sigh deeply and audibly and say, imagine what that could do for our schools. In the Constitution, however, so there's no plans to change that this year. The next forecast, as I said, is going to be released on May 14th, and that usually serves as the foundation for the legislatively adopted budget. That's all we got.
Now's the time for discussion.
Yes. Any questions? Dr. Split?
I have a few. We can keep them tight. I know it's late, and I want especially director. I'm always confused about people's titles. Leader, chief. Thank you. Just everybody's different. Chief Morrison, I know, especially you get sleepy on us, which is fine. Sorry, we always have you late. So I'm curious of a few small things. How do you forecast about the classes under 15, like in advance? Do you just look at what enrollment was this year and decide to cut them for next year, or do you have to wait and then make like fall decisions?
No, I mean, that's a really good question. So we get enrollment projections via Portland State, and so that generally happens in the fall. And so based on those specific projections, that's how we staff, right?
For the 15 students in middle school and high school classes?
So what happens is that, because generally what happens as a school is that they get their staffing overarchingly based on the number of kids that they're going to have. So if I'm talking specifically at the secondary level, then they kind of go through and they kind of had preliminary conversations of what potentially a schedule could look like. And then they have to decide, and remember at the secondary level, kids forecast already, right? So rising sophomores or rising juniors or rising seniors, they're forecasting for certain classes. Like we know we're going to offer obviously the core, those are very specific things, but you can collapse core classes as well. Where we get into sticky situations is around elective classes, right? And so those are the pieces, because that really truly depends on a student's level of interest. And so if students forecast at a lower level, principals, now we're saying is if you forecast for a certain elective class and it's below 15, you can't offer that class.
So we make that decision now.
Right.
Okay.
Unless there's an exception.
Great.
Which just is a great opportunity to understand then why when high schoolers are coming home saying, I can't get out of this elective class and I have to wait a week or two, it's because, schools were staffed based on the course selection sheets or the forecasting and the enrollment that came in, right? And so that's how they spent their funds, if you will, their budget. And so it tends to be a robust conversation in the fall when it's time to get the schedules.
Thanks for clarifying. I'm also curious about I know you had mentioned this before, but now thinking about it again, the forecasted 25% Title I reduction amount that you're already accounting for in the budget. I found myself asking a question I know you don't know the answer to. We won't probably ever know for sure whether we'll have that 25% or not, but do you have a time when you'll feel comfortable saying that still hasn't been cut, so let's proceed as though it hasn't been cut? Or do you think we'll just hold on to that money just in case something happens mid-year?
That's a good question, and I think we're working through that as administrators and how to support schools as they're doing their whole school planning. I do think that we're planning to staff at that level, knowing that if we do get affirmation of a higher level of funding, then we could choose how to supplement what's happening in schools. It's very difficult when it's tied up in staffing specifically to be more flexible. So this is the time that we're making those commitments to folks who are going to be working for PPS next year.
And then finally, one more question, then one very quick comment. You talked about flexibility being extended to principals, and I was just curious if you've revisited any policies or expectations to make that happen, or was it just the ones that you mentioned as far as like allowing 3-5 blends to be flexible and instructional coaches? Was that it on the flexibility, or was there a more generalized flexible approach?
Yeah, I would say that the overarching rule is principals do have flexibility when you're talking very specific to like general gen ed funds. But when you're talking about like the student investment account, SIA, there are specific stipulations that we have to abide by. So for example, there's flexibility. We're saying like at the elementary level, I'm just using this as an example, is that you have to maintain a base. So they were allotted, we're able to add back another 0.5 to make their instructional coaches whole at a 1.0. We were also able to specifically add back based on data like a 0.5 interventionist. SIA, because they're funded through SIA, that means they have to be interchangeable between the two. So we couldn't say, hey, I'm going to take 0.5 of that and then allocate it to be a classroom teacher, because that's SIA has specific guidelines for that. But I will say this, is that if you wanted to take, if you wanted to collapse a class size and maybe use some of that FTE to complete another support position, like an AP or something like that, there's flexibility on how to do that.
Thank you for sharing, and I think a couple weeks ago I made the point about trying to see more flexibility on arts and music, and it doesn't sound like you did in this case, but I'll continue to mention it whenever I have a chance. And then finally, my comment, I really hope we're doing some action alerts because PPS has like a huge email list, I assume, ahead of the state school fund hearing might be an interesting opportunity. Okay, great. Thank you for being on top of that. Love it. Thanks so much for letting me take a lot of time, Emnu.
Oh, no
Any
worries.
questions?
I'll just, I have like a quick question, I guess. I know there's a lot of, I think, conceptions out there, about blended classrooms, and I just want to say, straight up front, blended classrooms can work really great. I've seen them be very successful and has been very helpful for a lot of students, especially with very diverse learners. So I just throwing that out there. Blended is not a good or bad thing. It can be great. I guess my ask is concerned when we have teachers that, there's a difference between a teacher that has been teaching blended classrooms for years versus one that is transitioning from teaching a single grade to blended. Are there's like, I guess this also depends on school site, but do we have supports for teachers that are transitioning to a blended classroom?
Yes, and so when we decided to put forth this proposal, we wanted. Sorry, the whispering. I heard Chief Kafori. So one of the big pieces, right? Because we don't, and I agree with you. And we also do have blends currently, right? In some schools, Astor's one, for example. Beach is another. Been very successful in regards to the blends. But when we presented this as a a potential avenue to save, it's going to be coupled with support, and that includes OTL support in regards to curriculum, making sure, because it's another piece, and I would say also OSP and OTL support in regards to what does the pedagogy look like when you're talking about having a blended classroom. And so we're still working out maybe more logistics in regards to a PD plan of support, but yes, long story short, yes, there will be support.
Great, thank you. Director Sullivan?
Yes, it looked like all high schools will have college coordinators now. Is that correct?
So they were allotted, so they do have a college coordinator support via Measure 98 funding, but that's entirely separate. What we allocated was a 0.5, which they can license FTE, which they can use for a college coordinator or a career coordinator. So it really depends, and that's where some of the flexibility comes into play, where based on the school's needs, high schools can determine how to use that.
Okay, but with both sources of money, everybody will get one.
Everyone will get everyone has been allotted a 0.5 licensed FTE for that.
License, okay.
But it's flexible.
And you said the equity formula stays the same. Can you explain exactly how that works?
Yeah, I will try to explain it. All I can say is this, is that, and Dr. Adams and his team could explain a little bit more about the formula in itself, but in a sense, is what we say with the equity formula is that it's a formula derived to basically follow schools with our most historically underserved students. So if I were talking specifically at the high school level, we know, so one of the big pieces, like for example, at the high school level, if I were to use Grant, for example, which is about 2,200 students, but their school of poverty percentage is roughly around 25%, which previously would not have qualified 2 years ago for our equity formula or received any additional FTE support. But if 25% at Grant amounts to around 600 kids, right? So that is, so it follows the students. And so with that comes a potential FTE bump in regards to support. So the equity formula is intended to do exactly what it's called in terms of equity, is really follow the students, our most historically underserved.
And it really just means more FTE, correct?
You say that so simply, and yes, that's exactly right.
All right, thank you.
I just want to follow back up on the college and career And just to be clear on what's being said is that we had 1.0 allocated out of Measure 98 this school year, and we had an additional 1.0 out of general funds that funded career coordinators. And so what we did then is say here's a 0.5 allocation that can be used to either cover an employee that's licensed or a full-time employee that's not licensed. And that was based on feedback and survey results from our building admin team. So we've heard that some schools have added back a career coordinator. Some may choose to do other things based on the needs of their building. And so that's that flexibility piece. But I just wanted to bring that back forth just to be clear on that.
So that 0.5, when did that get added back? Has that always been available? Because it specifically in the staffing manual, it says we are not giving schools a 1 FTE for career coordinators.
Yeah.
So did the half thing get added later, or is it just
No.
you've identified that
So-
they
so
got it
what-
for something else, and now that if they and they were using it for something else, that they would have to go cut the something else in order to.
Yeah, so what the change was, just based on the feedback, was the flexibility to use that, again, to make a 1.0 career coordinator or utilize the 0.5 as the college coordinator.
I'm still confused. You get subsequent to our last meeting, they were given a 0.5?
Yes,
Or
they
it's
were-
just like you have the flexibility to use that and whatever, but they already had it. And then whatever they were using it on, they would have to stop doing that and.
Yeah, so it's not an add, we didn't add back. What we did do, cause it was part of the proposed initial reduction was the 0.5. What we did say, based on the feedback, is principals were asking some more flexibility on how to use that.
Yeah. Let me
But,
just.
but they're not getting they didn't get an additional 0.5. It's like you have flexibility to use it, but it's not like they got a 0.5 that then they could use.
I see your point. I think I see where I may have created some confusion. Let me just try that one more time. I'm sorry. So the thinking of a school that had a 1.0 allocation out of Measure 98 for college coordinators, right? And this is the licensed one. And then a 1.0 allocation for career coordinators, which is the unlicensed. And so the flexibility was that you're no longer obligated to have that 1.0 be that career coordinator. If you wanted to do a 0.5 college coordinator to add as opposed to the career coordinator, you now have the flexibility to do it.
But then you wouldn't have a career coordinator.
Well, so you're right. This is from buildings in terms of some of the things that came up for them and ways in which they wanted to staff their schools.
And I will say too, throughout the process, like these are one of the pieces around engagement and seeing, with buildings on. I mean, the reality is that we're also able to, because part of the initial proposed reduction was to, for example, increase class size at the high school level by 1. And so by doing things like this, unfortunately, with things like the career coordinator, is that allowed us some flexibility to be like, okay, we're not going to increase class size, by 1 overarchingly at the high school level. But at the same time, what you've heard is that increased flexibility, without having certain stipulations on how to use the less FTE they do have, has been appreciated.
Right, and I know we're hyper-focused right now on the college versus career coordinator. I just want to take the opportunity to say that both roles are valuable in the system, and that isn't the only decision or flexibility that principals ask for. There's other positions out there where, how they choose to expend their FTE based on the needs of their building will look different from school to school. but what we're already hearing when we asked is that, that there's some functions, I can't say across 100%, but most of the schools will continue to have career coordinator type functions. And so we can also bring that back a little later once, you know, everything is settled. But so, yeah, I just want to make sure it's not like that's the only flexibility the high school principals had. I know it's one that's come up for the board, so to tease it out a little bit more, I think made sense. But there are some, it's a totality of FTE that they could choose to allocate based on their needs.
Yeah, I had one more from. Okay, let me just, yeah, check on everyone first. Representative Katsavi?
Yeah, I think my question is regarding how would the 25% Title I reductions look like directly in a class or a school?
Well, it varies by school depending on what their allocation was. And so one of those mid-steps that administration took as we were approaching these budget reductions is kind of a school-by-school snapshot of the overall impact of the reductions between the change in enrollment that a school might be experiencing, the other factors, title changes to that school, so that we could see the total number of positions that would be impacted. And then we started to work through that to minimize the impact to schools. So there was a lot of thought that went into that, and a lot of feedback that we've heard to help us be very thoughtful about how we're targeting federal funds moving forward.
And then my next question is towards like the superintendent. Are you planning on having any reductions or cuts towards cabinet level positions?
Oh, that's a great question. So across senior leader, you say cabinet though, I need to think about that. There has been some changes, and I'm in April will be presenting a updated org chart to show where some of the reductions existed, and a redesign of a different approach to work. So I'll be prepared to bring that in April.
And then my next question is, what does like the budget engagement look like between principals and their school communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we create very specific slide decks for schools, very specific first for staff, but then also for community. And so there is an expectation, obviously, that we need to hit for, all community stakeholders within the school. And so whether it be through PTA meetings, primarily through PTA meetings is where we're finding a lot of those conversations, because we're talking about community members, they're very vested in exactly what is happening, and they know, because principals are very forthright with delivering some of the information and how it impacts. But when we do like, for example, our ISR, our staffing release to principals, the next day is when they're engaging their staffs. And so we have a very, I wouldn't say rigid, but we have a timeline with a level of engagement, but then also we provide talking points and slide decks for everyone.
And what does that engagement look like between the principals and like their student body?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it would probably vary from school to school. I would probably say it's more immense specific to budget, maybe more so at the secondary level, where they're engaging, using, for example, ASB or student body, kind of those particular types of things. But that's something I can get more information if you want it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a question. Well, I think the college coordinator question was asked by Directors Sullivan and Rem Edwards. I was kind of confused about what I heard. I think it's been answered. Title I impacts also another question, but in terms of the minimum class sizes, which schools are going to be impacted? And maybe said another way, are schools that have low enrollment, are those schools, I'm curious about those, particularly Jefferson, but there's other schools across our system that are under-enrolled.
Yeah, so and that's a question Director Brim Edwards brought up as well. We'll have to go back.
I'm concerned about like the the schools that have higher student need,
Sure.
you know, higher numbers of kids on free and reduced lunch.
In terms of the minimum class size?
Yes,
And
how,
and being able
how
to
those,
offer?
how that minimum, I thought it was an interesting way to report the data too, as a minimum, not a maximum, because we hear about maximum class size. But yeah, I'm just curious how that might play out and which schools are gonna be like feeling the most impacts. And are those schools that are feeling the most impacts closer to poverty?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so just so you know that our timeline is like we go through scheduling workshops with principals in April. And so that's really where we're going to get a better idea in terms of, okay, what are we offering from a class size perspective or program perspective? And so it's hard for me to comment on that right now just based on the SMT release. But once we go through those particular pieces, we'll get a better idea of, how many classes were we forced to collapse or not have based on that class size piece.
Okay, and then would you circle back with the board
Yes,
on
yes.
some response?
Yes.
The last question is, you said there's decisions that are made between an instructional coach, Res-J coordinator, restorative justice coordinator rather, climate specialist, or a social worker. Are those made at the building level by
Correct.
administrators?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So for example, for middle schools, for example, they were all given a 1.0 climate FTE, which they could use for Res-J, it can be for an SMS. That's the flexibility that they have there. But that's all entirely based on what the principal wants to do.
Okay. Are those the way those allocated, are they predictable by race?
In terms of what a principal decides to do with
Yes.
them,
At the building level?
I'd have to.
Can you circle back with that
Yes,
too?
I could circle back with that.
Thank you.
And know that because the SMT's just closed, like we're analyzing.
The
you know,
SMT.
Sorry, it's called the staffing management tool. It's where they,
Okay.
they get their staffing, and then they have to go through and decide how they're going to allocate their FTE, and then it closes. So then we kind of look at it, and then we have scheduling workshops that come up as kind of another check and balance and supporting them on how to actually schedule with the staff that they have. So yes, I can circle back.
Thank you.
John, can you repeat the climate FTE, the full titles of what those are?
Yeah, so so it's Res-J or RJ coordinator, or
It's a I thought it was a restorative justice.
Restorative
not
justice.
Not a racial equity.
correct, it's a restorative justice coordinator, getting my acronyms all mixed up. So it can be school social worker, restorative justice coordinator, or an SMS position. It's like a school climate position, like a student management.
Yeah, it's listed as instructional coach, restorative justice coordinator, a climate specialist, or a social worker.
Correct.
In your presentation.
That's correct.
Thanks. So I have just a statement, and then a couple questions. So having been through some of the absolute way worse than this times at PPS, I found that transparency is key to building trust and credibility in the district and a sense that we're all in it together. And that's especially true when fewer people seem to care when we're adding to the budget because their piece of the pie isn't shrinking or it's not having an impact on their child, but intense interest of what's happening when cuts are being made that are going to directly impact students. So I'll just say it's disappointing we don't have a heat map tonight because I feel like we're talking about something we haven't even seen yet, or we don't have any way of knowing. So for example, I think Director Pass's question is great about like who is that impacting? I'm noticing that now on this slide, the district is promoting blended classrooms, which it hasn't done in the past because actually it said, even though you just said that it was a strategy, it wasn't a strategy the district supported, and now we're promoting them. And I'd like to have some transparency on like where those are, because I can imagine where they are. I can imagine where they are, and our community should see what schools are gonna get the blended classrooms, and to understand, since most schools don't have those currently, what sort of supports we're giving teachers to actually deliver two grade level curriculums. And it's a skill, but it hasn't been a practice at PPS, so, what kind of supports, because if we're getting $2.6 million from promoting blended classrooms, there must be a fair number of them. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see how it all plays out, because I think it also would answer this question, because I still don't know what we're doing with career coordinators, because right in the staffing manual, it says we're not giving you an FTE. But again, if we had sort of like what got sent out to schools, or what we are saying is the staffing, how it plays out, I think we'll be able to see that. We'll also, I think, be able to see where there's inequities, perhaps geographically across the district. I also asked for the list of 37 FTEs that in slide 5, it says that we've added this back to schools, and it's like, that's great, I wonder where they got it added back. Like, I'm concerned about the Southeast Guidance Coalition schools that 10 have been stood out. But the answer I got back is that we're not going to be able to give you a list of schools where those 37 were added back.
Tonight.
Tonight, yes.
Tonight.
Okay, well,
We'll give that.
okay, but people are going to be undersigned, being laid off. I mean, and we're hearing from a lot of communities that are impacted. So the other thing, this kind of fits in the transparency. I think we have to be really cautious when we're talking about flexibility for principals. Because what I've heard from the school community viewpoint is like there's actually really not flexibility. The district has made a decision based on resources, and I'm not going to screen. When your class size gets to a certain level, like 34 at 4th grade, we're not going to give you additional FTE like we used to. Your flexibility now is either have a high class size or do a blend. And I think there's a lot of portraying principal flexibility as this is a positive thing, when actually they're making some really hard choices, and I just think we have to be, the central office, the board needs to be honest about, like, it's not this great thing they're getting flexibility. It's like you're getting fewer resources, and you're going to have to, you might have to cut something or take something else. And that's your flexibility. So again, I think how we talk about it is really important. Same thing with the career coordinators. So there's going to be a question at the end of this one, but I stated earlier that I'm opposed to PPS breaking their promise that they made to the Southeast Guiding Coalition schools, some that were really heavily impacted by boundary changes, and also by program changes and closures. And so if the district is proposing getting rid of that, breaking their promise, what are the supports that are being given? And again, because we don't have a heat map, we don't know what it is. We don't know what the supports are. So, for example, and I've shared this previous, but because Lentz was made an all Spanish school, and that's if you're in that neighborhood boundary, and that's your neighborhood designated school, and say you're in special ed, there's a number of students who are now going to Marysville. And so Marysville is having a disproportionate impact, and part of that, the FTE that we had that came about from that was to address situations like that, or where we changed a boundary, but because we had a sibling legacy rule, it's a long trail, so they still have lower numbers. So I'm curious, like, how we're going to support those schools, and again, in some of the lowest socioeconomic neighborhoods and most diverse neighborhoods in Portland.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I will say that regardless of not having that 10 FTE set SEGC piece, is that they're still a part of the process in regards to requesting FTE based on our limited set-aside bucket. And so, like, for example, we had our first round, and mind you, there's a piece that we go through, and there's going to be a few more iterations of this. So the first piece that we did recently was really about technical adjustment. So in other words, you referenced the core program a lot. and I would say too with the SCGC schools, there are pieces very specific around that money was really, or that the FTE was a bridge, right? So you don't have loss of program, so that you don't lose those particular types of things. So those are what we would deem as technical, because we don't want that to happen. And so know that if they put in a request and it was technical by nature, meaning we made a mistake based on the allocation, or it could mean a loss of program, that those are requests that we'll look to honor, right? And then we're also going to do another iteration come May and actually do a spring readjustment based on enrollment to kind of see where we are at. And so that could also mean, so you think about things that we do in the fall, we are going to apply those pieces earlier in the spring. And so that could mean, right, that we move some things around even more there to accommodate, where we see, large influxes of enrollment, but then also to see, okay, so is our projection off? Maybe we overestimated where you are and you're actually coming in a little bit lower enrolled. And that is in conjunction with what we're also going to be doing in the fall. So, and know that all of our principals, they submit requests, and we have to look at those specifically. And our first round was just based on technical adjustments. Are they able to meet core program? Are they able to do the things that the set-aside bucket was used for, specific for SCGC?
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in really quickly and say that just sort of a reminder that like we're all on the same team. We're all the district. So when we talk about promises made or the district, I mean we've redesigned our system to be more responsive based on the feedback that we heard from administrators. And so I think that there is some celebration in the fact that we're committed to being responsive. We're committed to listening. We're committed to putting every available resource back into schools. I mean, we have $40 million to reduce. I mean, that's a significant number. And, of course, any loss of any person, any position is significant. It's impactful. It's sad, it's disappointing, but to say that, we're not standing on our promise, we're not able to. We don't have the funds nor the FTE or the resources. And what the team and I set out to do is to be responsive to individual needs. And so I guess I'm sitting and wondering the question, are we responding to needs of buildings, or are we responding to interests of the board?
I think we're responding to the needs of the schools, which is why, and I look around and I think Director Wong and I are about the only people who participated in like a year and a half of meetings.
But not sat in the community conversations that we've been involved with over the last, 8 to 12 weeks. We've sat with our folks from a variety of positions to hear directly what they need from us to make this process work. And so I understand that there's process, there's things that predate me, there were commitments, there were promises, but I'm thinking about like this academic year, listening and hearing what's coming up for people and moves that we need to make to be more responsive. I think for me, my priority is to serve those who are in the building, who are like intimately involved with planning schedules, situating students in classrooms, interacting with communities, than commitments that were made a couple of years ago with a whole different budget and different resources that frankly we don't have available.
Well, I did ask Dr. Franco about like who decided, and it was like the larger principals, and it's like, okay, if you're not a principal of one of those schools, it is like that. It would be a lower priority, and I don't think principals were like, we don't want to give it to the Southeast Guided Coalition, but it wouldn't follow down the priority list if you're not one of those schools. But as I just say, we did make a promise, but this is also about why transparency is so important, because when people can see it, like you made a technical fix, well, that would be good to know, but I'm just saying, nobody knows. And so there's a lot of conversation in the community. Is this, is Southeast going to get stuck again, like we always do?
other words, when people say that this has been the most transparent process that has happened in the last several years, and then I continue to hear, well, transparency matters. I mean, I think that's what we're moving to do. I mean, no, it's not perfect, and we're still building, and I think next year will be better, and the year after, and the year after. But hearing the early on feedback that people feel like we're moving the needle on transparency and communication, I think is something worth noting.
I just
I
really quick.
I
Sorry.
give my 20 years experience. I'm just saying, the sooner we can get information out, the more it helps this school community process through it, because it's not, the information's not out there. I mean, it's just, so.
Thank you, Director Brimmerman. Yeah, I mean, your point about transparency is good, and I hear you too. I mean, I've seen great work in terms of transparency. It's been obvious. I just want to kind of add a little bit of perspective, because I know this set aside SCGC FTE has been a hot topic, but I just this is my zone. I know it very well, and your zone too. I know it very well, but just to add like a little bit of perspective, I'm sure that if you show all the parents this same choice, they would probably come to the same conclusion, is that a lot of the 10 SCGC that were allocated to certain schools, they're also adjacent to very high need schools that were not part of the SCGC but are neighbors. And we're talking about, I mean, I know some schools in my neighborhood are, there's pockets of very high poverty. There's some schools that are reporting 30% plus special ed, and they were not part of the SCGC process. And so when we present this case being like, oh, do you want to keep your 10 SCGC positions, and in order to do so, we have to take from this high sped school. I mean, I'm sure most parents would agree this is a choice between bad and worse, right? And this is very difficult. So I think if we can show these, like to your point, we show like, oh yeah, this is where the needs are. That would help a lot. But I am saying that out loud. I have seen the needs and I've seen the choices, and they're not good. And that's why, like, I am not pushing for the 10 SCG, but I do want some discussion around. But at the same time, I understand why they have been allocated elsewhere, because the needs, we need to respond to our students. And I think there's a lot of schools that were not part of the SCGC that have greater needs, and unfortunately, so.
And that includes, if I just may add, that also includes schools that lost foundation funding. I think there's this belief that because they're high SES, that they don't have students and have a tremendous amount of need. Obviously not like our designated schools, but they still have needs. They lost FTE as well. So creating some flexibility for them to be able to build in, like maybe a reading interventionist to be able to interact with students, because maybe they lost 2.3 FTE from fundraising, is the right thing for us to do on behalf of our kids, right? Like our kiddos who are impacted by multiple things going on in their life shouldn't only benefit from supports by going to a school that is a designated school, right? And so, and then the conversation about blends, with our class sizes, we have some that are high, average, and then we have some that are really low. And so when we looked at blend, we weren't looking at, okay, let's take those large class sizes and divide them out so that we don't add another. Let's look at where we're low. I mean, we have a kindergarten class with 7 students for next year so far, last count. That's not an anomaly. We have class sizes that are super low at some of those grade levels, and so blending them together so that we can save an FTE was also the right thing to do. And I take offense to the fact that there's an indication that only happened in our communities of color. That's not what happened at all. And so we'll be prepared to show data on that. But I also would hope that the board is expecting that we're moving with intention with our students and community in mind, because any other implication that we're not doing that is just completely unjust, inappropriate, and quite offensive.
Frankly, I didn't say that the students of colors were the blended classrooms. I said I would want to see the schools, it's typically the lower enrolled schools that have like single strands that are they're generally being blended. And again, this is why having transparency to be able to to see that, and I think that's what we owe it to our school community. And you all have visibility to things that we haven't seen, so it's hard for us to understand what the choices that are being made or the trade-offs.
Okay, thank you. Oh. I was hoping I had the last word, but well, I guess we'll move on. Thank you for all the information you provided. That was really very helpful. And all the passion that you see up here is because we care about our kids and our students. So thank you all. All right, the last thing on here, I did have a request from a couple board members to move their committee reports to the next meeting. I don't know, Director Brim, I didn't ask you yet. Okay, so we'll follow up later. But so we don't have any of those unless there's other issues. Oh, Director Sullivan?
Yeah, I will give just quickly, the audit committee's next meeting is scheduled for April 15th at 5 o'clock. And I will provide the board with a preview of that meeting's agenda at our April 8th meeting. So if you love audit committees, you can come next April 15th.
I love audit committee meetings.
Yes, great.
Yes. Thank you, Director Sullivan. All right, with that, we are adjourned.